unusual actions of the main characters of the plot. Araline Halban, who had recently entered the girl's body, was horrified by the drink she was offered. While her fair-haired friend insisted that the medicine needed to be taken, this child's name was Peshan Alamend, and he was the crown prince who was in love with the heroine. For some reason, the lady could not resist her friend's unpleasant actions. So every time all his persuasions and her refusals ended with Miss losing again. At the same time, the children's care was inept, so it did not always help Arel feel well. But the girl did not dare to be indignant, because it was impossible to get rid of her persistent friend. The boy, using his connections, trained highly qualified doctors to maintain the lady's health. All these people supported the Duke's daughter in her desire to become stronger through training. Peshan had been obsessed with Araline's health almost since their meeting, so the lady could not escape. Almost every day, the little girl had to train her body to increase her endurance and strength. Arel felt like she was on the verge of fainting many times, but he never came to her. The heroine was in such poor health that she couldn't even walk for long periods. But the prince did not despair at all, since he was going to make his friend the strongest. In her past life, Arel was a famous and talented musician who played the violin. But at a young age, the girl was hit by a sedan, which is why her life was so cruelly cut short. This is how the heroine was reborn into a little girl who could barely breathe properly. It was only thanks to her love of reading novels that the girl realized which one she had gotten herself into. Miss became the sole heir of the famous Halban family, but was soon to die. This is because the girl often felt dizzy to the point of fainting, even from a simple walk. The heroine could not in any way correct the fact that she became the owner of such a weak body. The Duke's daughter did not immediately notice that her life on the estate was not as fabulous as she would have liked. Many of the maids looked down on the girl, whose mother they had never seen. The Duke once brought the child into the house without a word, where he left him to be raised by the butler. But according to the plot, Arel was destined to die before the decade was over, taking the truth to the grave. The heroine was horrified by the fact that she had only a few years to live before death. But in order to change her destiny, Arelyn needed good health. But all the little girl's attempts to fix something again drove her to bed due to illness. The girl was lost because memories from her past life came crashing down on her. The only person who cared for the lady all her life was Mehen Leborgen. Because of his harsh nature, many maids avoided communicating with this man. Mehen almost never smiled, although he tried to provide Arelyn with a good life. The heroine did not immediately get used to the behavior of the butler, who rarely visited her in person. In his presence, the girl constantly felt as if she was listening to some kind of report. Leborgen managed the Halban estate better than any of his predecessors. Because of his secluded lifestyle, many people found the man unsociable and menacing. But the lady had long since realized that Mehen was simply so busy with work that he did not rest. The current Araline was different from the previous one, as she did not know how the Duke's daughter behaved initially. But the heroine didn't even try to be a different person, since she was supposed to die soon anyway. The butler immediately noticed that the behavior of the Duke's daughter had somehow become somewhat different. But he would never have dared to ask the little girl questions, because she couldn't be nervous. The man was worried that the lady had locked herself in her room and never went out. While he had previously been worried about her walks, now the reason for his stress had become the opposite. Arel didn't want to enjoy her fleeting life, so she did nothing. The girl's decision could have worried anyone, although few paid attention to her. Mehen had so little contact with the miss that he urgently gathered all his assistants. The man was going to personally figure out why the Duke's daughter's behavior had changed. Leborgen didn't know how to raise children, so he only sponsored a good life for the little girl. He hired a special squad of the best people to look after the little lady. Mehen trusted only these assistants completely, as he had tested their skills himself. The one who spent the most time with Araline was the maid Rena, who was the first to start worrying. Head butler Ern also noticed that the young lady had stopped smiling altogether. From all this information, Leborgen could not understand what had happened to the Duke's daughter. Even the girl's closest assistants were confused by such obvious changes. The manager could not afford to ignore the fact that something was wrong with his charge. But Rena was sure that everything would soon change, because Aralina had an important meeting awaiting her. The little girl was to visit the imperial palace to play with the children of aristocrats. The heroine herself was not happy about this social event, but found no reason to refuse. This world was different from hers, as it was based on advanced magical engineering. Therefore, Miss had something to look at in the beautifully appointed palace of the Emperor himself. The only thing that saddened Halban was the strain on her weak body due to travel. But the girl was not going to show her weaknesses to anyone because she considered everyone around her to be her enemy. Previously, none of the children wanted to communicate with the lady, whose origins were unknown. Even now, no one paid any attention to the girl's arrival due to her unknown status. But the heroine knew perfectly well that the beautiful twins were named Ciel and Noel Sperum. And that quiet boy was Harun Movie, who always followed his friends. Each of them had their own destiny in the future, from a womanizer to a mad swordmaster. But the lady was not interested in watching the love triangle develop between them. Araline wasn't yet used to the fact that she knew the future of all the children of aristocrats in this room. She would like to return to her dull existence at Halban Manor as soon as possible. This is all because even at that age, children had a developed understanding of status. That's why they all gravitated towards the Crown Prince, who was the star of this society. Even Araline didn't expect the Emperor's child to radiate such health and beauty. It was not without reason that Peshin attracted the attention of those around him, because he was the brightest among the children. It was he who always decided what his friends would play at the next official meeting. But all the physically active games passed by the lady who couldn't even walk. She still couldn't understand where the other children got so much energy and health. For this reason, the guys quickly left Araline alone, which did not surprise her at all. Halban had experienced before that no one cared about her presence at meetings. Therefore, the lady was not at all sad about being left completely alone again. In her childhood, the girl was called a noble aristocrat, born into the Halban family. But the reality was that even the estate's maids considered their mistress superfluous. So no one noticed that the girl began to behave differently due to the reincarnation. The heroine would have liked to have only a loving family, but in this life she was left without one. So she didn't expect anything good from children who repeated the behavior of their arrogant parents. Araline once again became an only child who could not find a friend. Only the maid, due to her duty, kept an eye on the girl, not wanting to leave her completely alone. But the heroine herself did not want such company, since it was much easier for her to walk without people around. No matter how much the assistant insisted on this option, all her arguments were useless. The girl suspected that her predecessor was struggling to keep up with the other children. But the new Araline did not want to abuse her own body, just to avoid being an outcast in the company. Therefore, the girl remained in the shade of a tree in the imperial garden, just so as not to exhaust herself. Even in her past life, the heroine could only experience the full beauty of life when alone with nature. But this time, the solitude did not last long, as the little girl noticed the movement of her tail. A white kitten majestically emerged from the bushes to meet the lady, demanding that she play with it. Araline has always loved animals, so she couldn't ignore the furry one's sweet request. But the kitten was so intent on playing that he immediately ran away from the girl. This upset the lady a little, as she would have liked to remain in the company of the cute animal. But fate decreed otherwise, and the heroine came face to face with the prince. Before, like everyone else, the boy did not pay attention to the duke's daughter, and therefore did not recognize her. The little girl immediately realized that her calm presence in the Emperor's palace was over. Araline struggled to come up with an excuse to be alone in the garden again. But the prince was serious about inviting this girl to play with the rest of the aristocrats' children. The duke's daughter grew paler with each passing moment from stress, as she did not want to communicate with the child. She honestly admitted that she could not play with children because she would quickly faint. Peshin only became more interested in the lady, who allegedly couldn't even run properly. No matter how hard Araline tried to remain alone, her actions only attracted the prince more. The girl had already regretted several times that she had not run away immediately when she had the chance. The Emperor's heir was so persistent that he demanded to demonstrate the health of the miss. The heroine realized too late that she would actually have to faint to make him leave her alone. So, under Peshin's curious gaze, Halban began to run towards the trees. The lady remembered perfectly well that it would only take a few seconds for her to lose consciousness. But for the prince, who was sure the girl was lying, her poor condition came as a real surprise. Alamend barely managed to catch Araline, who fell unconscious right into his arms with horror in her eyes. By coincidence, it was at this moment that the maid came out to look for the missing young mistress. The assistant barely held back a cry of panic when she saw Araline's state, that she had lost consciousness. But the heroine herself no longer heard anything, as she had fallen into a deep and senseless sleep. Literally a few hours later, the estate manager learned about everything that had happened. It seemed to him that a gathering of children was something safe, even for his sick charge. But as a result, Araline did not come to her senses even after returning to her favourite bed at home. But what worried Leiborgen most about this situation was the reaction of the Halban estate assistants. For some reason, they all simultaneously blamed the imperial family for what happened to their young mistress. So Mehanu again had to urgently call all of the girls' nannies to sort out the situation. Rena managed to bring the lady to her senses, but still did not get any clear answers from her about what had happened. Instead, immediately after waking up, the little girl withdrew into herself, locking herself in her room. Trouble was happening to the prince at the imperial palace at that very moment. The boy already felt guilty, and then his strict mother called him in for a talk. She immediately warned her son that any actions towards other people have their consequences. But the boy didn't expect that the Empress would take the sweets away from him until he earned Araline's forgiveness. This punishment was a painful blow to the honor of a child who had always done everything perfectly in life. The next morning, when Araline was feeling better, she attended breakfast in the open air. The baby hoped that because of her condition, as few people as possible would disturb her. The heroine was horrified by how low her stamina was in this new life. Although the lady expected to faint, she did not expect it to happen so quickly. The girl had no health problems in her past life, so it was difficult for her to accept this. But even in this situation, the miss could not fully enjoy her solitude because of the maids. They, by pure chance, started whispering nasty things about the Duke's daughter right under her balcony. The assistants showered the lady with poisonous words, which did not allow the manager to live in peace. But no matter how hard these girls tried, the heroine still didn't care about all their hurtful words. Even in her past life, she constantly encountered similar things due to hatred towards her talent. Every time the lady thought she had found friends again, they ended up turning away from her out of envy. So the only thing that was truly important to Miss was her music and her mother. Araline was not at all surprised by the fact that this life was no different from the previous one. The little girl just wanted to find a person who would finally become her real family. At this point, Mehan locked himself in his office because of his worries about the Duke's daughter. Never before had Leiborgen thought that it would be so difficult for him to raise a child alone. He was killed by the memories of the empty look of the girl who had just recently smiled at everyone around her. So the manager kept trying to figure out at what point he made a mistake in raising the little girl. Every time the lady greeted him with a smile, the man turned away from her with embarrassment. It seemed to him that the guardian's job was only to have short-term contact with the little ward. But now Meekan realized that all this time he had been depriving the girl of her family, which was more important to her. What irritated the manager most was that the Duke did not answer his calls on the ball. And even his closest assistant, Dylan, couldn't help solve these problems. The man wanted his father to play a role in his daughter's life at least once in his life. Only Dylan hinted to Mehan that for the lady he was much more important than the incomprehensible Duke. After all this time the girl was striving for love and recognition from the only person close to her. But Leiborgen was blinded by his desire to provide the baby with a rich and luxurious life. However, his thoughts were interrupted by a maid who announced the arrival of the crown prince. This surprised the manager, since no one from the imperial family had visited them before. However, he quickly realized that the boy had come to apologize. Peshin still really felt guilty about what happened to Araline. The prince wanted to personally apologize to the girl to make sure she was okay. But Mehan could not allow this meeting to take place because the lady had locked herself in the room. The child did not lose his composure and opened the chest in which his mother had given him various valuables. Leiborgen didn't even blink an eye, despite the wealth of everything presented on the table. The prince's personal assistant, Green, realized that they would not get off so easily. After all, this stern man was trying his best to contain his anger so as not to lose it on the child. So the butler of the imperial house was even glad when they were shown the door. However, his protégé was not willing to give up so easily, as he wanted to see Aralina. Green immediately realized that the prince was up to something, as it was visible on his face. Peshen eventually asked his assistant to distract Mehen until he could speak with the young lady. The butler didn't have time to move before the boy had already disappeared around the nearest corner, so Green had no choice but to fulfill the master's request. No matter how scared the assistant was to be left alone with Mehen, he stayed with him. Meanwhile, Peshen looked with interest through the corridors of the estate in search of the girl. He noticed with surprise that during the entire time he had not met a single person in the corridors. But in his house, people were constantly bustling about, and luxurious imperial life was in full swing. While this place seemed to repel everyone around with its emptiness and cold, no matter how uncomfortable this made the prince, he was stubborn in his desire to find Araline. In fact, the child did not wish any harm to the duke's daughter, he simply doubted her words. And this led to the fact that he now wanted to avoid it with all his might, because he did not like evil. So the bitterness of his actions forced the boy to move forward to apologize. Suddenly he saw only one slightly open door, from which a faint light was pouring into the corridor. Since Peshen had no other option, he approached closer with curiosity. Almost immediately the boy noticed that this place did not look like an ordinary servant's room. The bright light that was inside blinded him for a moment with its intensity. But what surprised the prince most was the pleasant and barely noticeable floral aroma in this place. It turned out that, quite by chance, the heir found the very room where the lady lived. Araline wasn't expecting any guests, so she acted naturally and relaxed at that moment. The boy felt his breath catch at the sight of the lady's pink eyes and golden hair. The girl herself maintained an impenetrable calm, although she did not want to see the intruder. Peshen's heart beat faster from surprise, no matter how hard he tried to calm down. The first thing Halban asked was how the boy had ended up in her room in the first place. Alamond was surprised that he started to get nervous over such a simple situation. The prince could barely squeeze out words of forgiveness for bringing the miss to such a state. But the heroine didn't care what the child felt because she still wanted to leave then. Therefore, the lady did not at all appreciate the fact that the boy personally apologized to her. The little girl sullenly declared that she had run away on purpose just to faint and that it was her own fault. The heroine guessed that the prince had secretly made his way to her and promised not to tell anyone. For the first time in his life, Pession was at a loss for words in front of another person, which embarrassed him. What surprised the child most was that someone dared to throw him out of the room. Throughout his life, the heir to the throne encountered only respect and admiration. He didn't know that the maids had been watching his interaction with the lady the whole time. They were worried about how this conversation went because the lady was rather unsociable. However, one of the assistants still brought the girl medicine for her illness every hour. The only thing that stopped her was that there was a gloomy manager in front of the lady's room. Seeing Mehen's face like that, one of the butlers suggested bringing the medicine a little later. But Uni couldn't do that, because it was important for Miss to take the elixir exactly on time. Although even the faithful assistant was afraid of the menacing state of the gentleman who stood frozen in front of the door. None of the servants dared to talk to him about what was happening, fearing the manager's wrath. Leiborgen could not understand how exactly he should treat the Duke's daughter. He took on the responsibility of raising the baby, and now he wanted to show warmth. Araline successfully pretended that nothing had happened to her recently, but this lie was quickly revealed by the clever manager, which scared the little girl a little. The man understood perfectly well that he should not have interrogated the young and sick girl. Instead, she should have been treated with care and understanding to give her love. However, Mehen felt nervous when he tried to communicate tenderly with a lady who was always alone. Halban had become accustomed to the fact that she was merely Leiborgen's ward. Therefore, she did not expect anything good from him, except for more reports on his work. Mehen had long since missed the opportunity to get closer to the little girl he was thinking about now. So he could do nothing about the empty eyes of the Duke's daughter who had accepted her death. This circumstance hurt the assistant so much that he realized the mistakes he had made too late. But, as before, he still did not dare to take the first step towards getting closer to the girl. So the heroine was once again left alone, something she had become accustomed to throughout her life. While Mehen couldn't get the empty eyes of the little girl looking at him out of his head, the manager didn't want to see that expression on the child's face, but it was too late. As usual, Araline took her medication as scheduled, which prolonged her life. It prevented all the attacks that the lady experienced due to her weak body. But this time, it wasn't Uni who brought the medicine, which made Miss a little wary. It was the same assistant who periodically whispered behind the young lady's back. For this reason, the heroine had no desire to communicate with this maid. She showed this with her whole appearance, demonstratively turning away towards the wall. At this time, in the Imperial Palace, Green was forced to worry about the young master. The boy hung a portrait of Aralina in his room because he had fallen in love with her. He could not understand why this girl was so weak, why he was worried. Since the last meeting between the prince and the Duke's daughter, Green had been constantly hearing about her. Peshen spoke only about the little girl, who shocked him to the depths of his soul with her behavior. The butler encouraged the child in every possible way, because that was his job. But he couldn't do anything about the fact that the lady didn't come to the meeting of the children of aristocrats. The heir blamed his assistant for everything, which made him even more determined to resign from his position. The child harshly reprimanded Green, although he had always been on his side. In such a bad mood, Peshen was not ready to listen to logical arguments. The image of Aralina, who reminded him of a kitten, would not leave the heir's head. The boy felt sad at the thought that he might never see the baby again. This made Green afraid of every action of the gentleman, who had a hot temper, and at that very moment, the child had a brilliant idea regarding Aralina. It turned out that the boy had decided to personally visit the Duke of Halban's estate right then and there. Even though he had not given advance notice of his arrival, the prince demanded to be allowed in. Green tried his best to negotiate with the guards so as not to bring trouble to the palace, while Peshen was committing ever greater madness, completely forgetting about decency and etiquette. No matter how much the butler begged the master not to create problems, it was all useless. As a result, the heir brazenly burst into someone else's estate in the hope of meeting Aralyn. It just turned out that he had trouble remembering the way to the right room in the winding corridors. But the prince almost immediately noticed that the maids were discussing something not very good. It turned out that the assistants were taking advantage of the loneliness and laughing at the young lady. Even Green felt disgusted to listen to their poisonous words about the girl they cared about. Peshen immediately realized that he had to listen to the end to understand this conversation. And the maids were so engrossed in their conversation that they didn't notice anyone around them. The assistants were only glad that Aralyn was soon to die. Only after these words the prince could not resist and drew the girl's attention to himself. The butler was no less angry than his master about the maid's behavior. The assistants fell on their knees, begging for forgiveness and their lives before His Majesty. It never occurred to them that the heir would one day overhear their conversations. Peshen was not ready to pardon these girls who so openly laughed at the Duke's daughter. In their faces he saw an incredible amount of anger directed directly at Arelyn. For the first time in his life, Alamend felt the blood boiling in his veins from immeasurable anger. Due to the commotion, the maids were quickly surrounded by the rest of the servants who did not know what to do. As a result, Mayhen quickly came to the noise, worried about the prince's presence in the estate. Leiborgen could not understand why the Emperor's son was scolding the maids of his house. The assistants finally realized that their life as servants would end here. Only Arelyn could save them if she gave permission to pardon her servants. So the cunning girls rushed to the mistress, begging her to take their side. But Peshen wasn't going to let the maids go so easily after they crossed the line. Before, Mayhen had no idea that someone in the estate dared to spread rumors about the lady. But for Aralyn herself, this did not come as a surprise because she had already heard such words. It came as a surprise to those close to the girl that she had already encountered anger more than once. The Duke's daughter accepted these words calmly because she believed that the maids were right. No matter how much Uni tried to convince the little girl otherwise, it was all useless for the lady. Leiborgen interrupted all the senseless conversations with one word, forcing the servants to remain silent. While the assistants watched the maids in confusion, Mehen came up with an idea of what to do. With quiet anger in his voice, he ordered the assistants to be locked up until he dealt with them himself. As soon as the servants had dispersed, Peshin joyfully ran up to the Duke's daughter. The heroine did not expect to meet this annoying man so quickly. She endured with a sad sigh the energy and enthusiasm that the cheerful child radiated. The boy himself admitted that he decided to visit the girl who did not come to the meeting. Araline couldn't understand what the crown prince and she could have in common. However, out of politeness, the lady thanked Peshin for protecting her. Although the child should not have stood up for the lady, because he would have risked his status in doing so. The heroine felt so bad that the prince's face periodically blurred. The poor condition of the Duke of Halban's daughter was evident from her pale face and lips. So Miss tried not to drag out the conversation so that she wouldn't feel even worse because of it. Unlike the prince, she did not seek to communicate with him, preferring only silence. Accompanied by Uni, the lady happily returned to her room, where she was alone. But the outlines of furniture and walls constantly swirled before the girl's eyes. The assistant did not immediately realize that the baby was so ill that she lost consciousness. Once again, Araline fell to the floor unconscious, and this time it was not Peshin's fault. At that moment, Mehen had no idea what had happened to his beloved ward. He scolded the head butler, who was so poor at supervising the behavior of the maids. Leiborgen simply didn't know who else to take out his anger on for today's unpleasant incident. It was the first time he found himself in such a hopeless situation, because he could always find a way out. But the man could not find any logic or meaning in Aralina's behavior lately. All her life, Lady Mehen had cared for her, but it turned out that it was not enough. However, Leiborgen's thoughts were interrupted by an assistant who suddenly appeared with disturbing news. The manager was not ready to listen to the latest problem, as he had not even had time to eat. But Dylan's news could not be delayed, for the Duke's daughter suddenly fainted. The latest incident weighed heavily on Mehen's heart, which was already on the verge of panic. Uni tried her best to help the girl, but her medical qualifications were not sufficient. She saw that the symptoms of an attack were clearly showing on Miss's body, which in theory should not happen. When Leiborgen burst into the young lady's room, she only became worse due to lack of treatment. The girl, with tears in her eyes, said that she herself did not understand what was happening to the baby. What upset Leiborgen most was that he had to wait some more time for the head doctor. He remembered that due to the pressure of his work, he had not checked on Miss's medication intake. However, Uni was sure that another maid had brought the necessary potion for Araline on time. Only now did the maid begin to doubt how well the assistant had done the job. While the adults tried to help the girl, the heroine, in her delirium, began calling for her mother to help. In this state, she recalled her past life, which she spent near the instruments. The girl did nothing but study music in order to make her mother's dream come true. This woman had failed in her career, so she placed all her unfulfilled wishes on her daughter. But on that fateful day, the heroine was unable to lift the bow to play the melody. The only thing that mattered to her was her mother, who cared only about her daughter's career and not about her fortune. The girl could not see the face of the woman whose love she had been trying to win since childhood. A fit of panic gripped the lady's entire body, taking her breath away and painfully squeezing her useless heart. All the heroine herself dreamed of was the true love of her mother, who seemed to be getting further and further away from her. When the girl refused to play the violin, the entire illusory world was destroyed for her in an instant. The mother turned away from her daughter, which stopped her from realizing her past dream in this life. This is how the heroine once again found herself completely alone in complete darkness, which she was actually very afraid of. Upon awakening, Araline suddenly felt someone's warm presence next to her. This allowed the girl to once again fall into a deep, calm and carefree sleep for a while. Mehen remained guarding his mistress's condition until the very end, not even suspecting her moral torment. The man felt awkward because, in a fit of help, he took the baby by the hand and she fell asleep. Leiborgen was interested to know what the little girl felt when she was so desperately searching for her mother. He managed to hear several times how the lady called out to a man whom she had never seen in her life. The girl woke up only the next morning and did not immediately remember what had happened. She woke up from a disturbing dream for a long time, trying not to think about her nasty past anymore. But Aralyn didn't expect to find Mayhen right next to her bed when she woke up. Half asleep, the little girl accidentally called the man Mom because she needed it so much. The heroine quickly realized her mistake, causing an awkward silence to hang in the air between them. He was interrupted by the manager, who was still worried about the condition of his charge. But the lady had not yet had time to recover from her sleep, so she again called the person, who was a man, Mom. She turned away from him with tears in her eyes as she was upset by her mother's absence. As a result, Le Borgne had to console the girl, although he was not to blame for her whims. From the moment the master brought his daughter to the estate, everything changed in Mayhen's life. The envious assistant's evil glances instantly turned to the girl. But everyone was not interested in her condition, but in who could be the mother of this child. But the Halban family's magic stone confirmed the girl's blood as that of the Grand Duke. However, no one could believe that such a stern man fell in love with a woman. Mayhen was always afraid that the little girl would one day ask about her parents. He even prepared a whole stack of papers for this eventuality, but none of them were useful. So Le Borgne accepted the fact that not all children were interested in their relatives. But the tears in the girl's eyes told the man that she was keeping everything to herself. And now Aralyn could not accept the reality in which she had no parents. The heroine was ashamed of her hysteria, but she could not stop her bitter tears. In the end, Mayhen, with a sigh, allowed the girl to call herself mother if that was what she wanted. These words completely shocked the lady, who was sure that Le Borgne hated her. All this time, it seemed to miss that every person in the estate wanted to get rid of her. But the manager did not even think about such an act, which he did not talk about. The man sadly stroked Aralyn's head as she cried, realizing how hard it was for her. For the first time in his life, Mayhen admitted that he himself had grown up as an orphan, which is why he knew so little about love. The heroine listened with interest to the story of the man, who always kept his distance. Le Borgne apologized to Miss for his inexperience in caring for small children. He promised that he would never want to get rid of the girl, because he himself was not good enough. These words had a pleasant effect on the love-starved heroine. She was finally able to calm down because she found a supportive person nearby. The Duke's daughter asked Mayhen to call himself her mother if he truly repented. So Le Borgne had to accept a new role, which was even more unfamiliar to him. It was much more important for the manager that the Duke's daughter was happy with him. So he became the mother of a girl with a smile, although it was impossible from a biological point of view. Aralyn watched in amazement as this cold man opened up before her eyes. The heroine was sure that Le Borgne was not the type to indulge children's whims. But now, for the first time in a long time, the little girl was able to smile back sincerely. Soon the doctor arrived and improved the condition of the Duke's daughter, who had lost consciousness. Le Borgne personally supervised the treatment, as he was still worried about what had happened. As soon as Aralyn fell asleep, Mayhen began to interrogate the maid about the lady's medicine. Yuin sadly admitted that someone had stolen the potion and Miss was left without it. One day she ordered another maid to give out the medicine and did not follow through. The girl was found dead a little later, so it was not possible to find out anything more. The assistant was so shocked by what happened that she was not even bothered by the cause of death. But the manager did not believe that the girl could so easily kill herself in the estate. However, he did not share his sad suspicions with the already frightened Uni. The maid promised that from now on she would monitor her mistress's condition more closely. But even this did not help Mayhen contain his anger directed at the traitors. Only after consulting with the doctor, the manager was convinced that the miss was not in any danger. The girl stabilized quite quickly after a recent severe attack of the disease. But Mayhen did not see the baby's good condition as his own merit, since he had done nothing. He just tried to be close to the lady lately so that she wouldn't feel lonely. The only thing the doctor was worried about was that over time, the Duke's daughter's body was becoming weaker. But Le Borgne was not prepared to hear that his charge's condition could not improve. All the adults could do was hope that the Duke's weak daughter would last as long as possible. The fact that the baby could still be physically active was already a miracle for many. Araline herself had no idea how bad things were with her incurable disease. Looking at the girl, Mayhen felt even sadder about the fact that the Duke never showed up at the estate. So instead of the good-for-nothing father, it was the manager, inept at this matter, who had to please the lady. Leiborgen became so attached to the baby that he was ready to exchange his own life with her. But this was impossible, so the man promised himself that he would please the Duke's daughter more often. Right now, the little girl was smiling so happily, as if nothing bad had ever happened in her life before. She held Leiborgen's hand tightly, and he suddenly rethought his attitude towards her. At the same time, a meeting of children was held again in the imperial palace, but Aralina was not present. All the children of the aristocrats were worried about the sad prince, who did not want to play with anyone. The heir was sad because a letter had arrived from the Halban estate again about the Duke's daughter fainting. In such a mood, no one who was significantly lower in status dared to approach the boy. But the twins were not afraid to attract the prince's attention, since they were his friends. But even for them, Peshin did not find the strength to smile, since he was not in the mood to play. But the boys weren't going to give up so easily when it came to games. Finally, Alamond admitted that he was so troubled by one thought that he could not relax. Noel and Ciel were always plagued by curiosity, so they couldn't help but want to find out more information. Hearing that the prince wanted to visit a sick man, the twins immediately approved of his idea. Poor Green didn't have time to do anything before the spark of madness and energy ignited again in his ward. As a result, the prince happily ended the children's meeting in order to go to meet the sweet Araline. The assistant had no choice but to silently follow the self-confident gentleman. The twins had no idea that they had just persuaded the Emperor's son to make a not very good plan. So the newly recovered Araline was in for an unpleasant surprise in the form of a guest. As soon as the little girl opened the door, Peshin almost knocked her down with joy as he wanted to talk. The energetic boy began to bombard the lady with questions so quickly that she did not have time to answer. Miss would prefer peace and quiet to another meeting with the noisy and restless prince. So the Duke's daughter directly informed that the child should be at the meeting of the children of aristocrats. She was sure that she would not see any unfamiliar individuals at the estate in the near future. In response, the prince directly stated that he was concerned about the miss's condition, and therefore decided to check it personally. The heroine was tense by the fact that the heir was paying attention to her, while the other children were left out in the cold. However, Peshin himself seemed not to understand how important his communication was for the children of aristocrats. Araline only wanted to get rid of the annoying acquaintance who was violating her boundaries as quickly as possible. But the impudent heir had plans to properly monitor the girl's condition. The little girl sighed sadly, since she had no intention of allowing herself to become attached to Peshin. She was sure that the boy was only temporarily interested, so she didn't drive him away. Therefore, the lady had to silently endure the prince's company and constantly answer his questions. The heroine was even amused by the fact that Alamand was sincerely trying to sit in one place, just like her. Unexpectedly for herself, the girl smiled at the sight of the awkward efforts of the overly energetic child. This did not escape the attentive Peshin, who was now watching the Duke's daughter. Miss herself could not explain why she experienced emotions that she had never given vent to before. While chatting a little about various things, the children were still able to spend some time peacefully in each other's company. Meanwhile, Mayhen contacted Duke Halban's finest knight, Yaron Mubisk. In fact, the manager hoped that his master would answer, but for some reason this did not happen. Yaron swore on his honor that he would definitely convey to the Duke all the words of his faithful assistant at the estate. But Leiborgen was so angry that he called Araline's father trash for not taking care of his daughter. At this point, the man quickly ended the conversation, as he didn't want to say any more stupid things to Yaron. In fact, Mayhen initially assembled a team of the best people for Araline, and Uni was responsible for medicine. Amber was the quietest of the five, but she cooked very well and nutritious meals for the girl. And Rena and Ern made sure that Miss studied well and was protected from attacks from other people. If before all these people behaved moderately, now the heroine could not find a way past them. The little girl sincerely did not understand what had happened to the assistants who began to spend more time with her. The heroine directly kicked people out under the pretext of reading, but none of this worked. Moreover, the servants stubbornly tried to drag the young lady out for a walk, which she did not want. Rena explained for everyone that they had reconsidered their attitude towards caring for the little lady. However, Leiborgen appeared as always on time and did not let the maid speak out completely. The miss was genuinely glad to see the man who had interrupted her suffering from the servants. The girl called Mehen Mom because she liked this agreement between them. This caused a slight stir among the servants, who did not expect such treatment. They even began to consider the possibility that Leiborgen was a relative of the girl. But the manager put an end to all these rumors with one word, which were not even partially true. The man always did his job honestly, so he was unhappy with the suspicions from the servants. Since there was enough anger inside Leiborgen, he quickly intimidated all his assistants. Uni sadly admitted in response that they, too, would like to get closer to the lady, just like the manager. However, Mehen was unwilling to allow the lady's close aides to pester her with their advice. The whole team felt ashamed of their behavior, which they agreed on, as they had gone too far. Leiborgen could not find a way to control these people, since he could only trust them to take care of the Duke's daughter. In recent days, he has fired all the servants who were even slightly suspicious in their behavior. All this was done to ensure the complete safety of Aralina, who was in poor health. So the manager was quite tired during these days, during which he reviewed the biography of each employee. But most of all, Leiborgen got into trouble because of his unpleasant words towards the gentleman, since a response came from him. The Duke said that for the first time he would forgive his brilliant assistant for allowing himself to use bad words. The next day, Peshin was in a good mood, as he knew that Araline was due to come. He glanced impatiently towards the door, which did not escape the notice of the other children of the aristocrats at the meeting. The boy paid no attention to any other ladies, as he was only waiting for the Duke's daughter. Each time the child jumped up with joy, but quickly realized that it was not Aralina who had come at all. He could only hope that the girl would actually attend this children's meeting. And just at the moment when the little boy had already given up hope, the heroine calmly entered the main meeting hall. Peshin immediately, like a devoted puppy, joyfully ran up to the girl he had been waiting for. The little girl sincerely could not understand how she had ended up in such a situation and become the center of attention. The lady hoped, as always, to watch the children from the sidelines, enjoying her solitude. But the active Peshin did not give the Duke's daughter a single opportunity, forcing her to talk to him. The lady tried until the very end to come up with some kind of excuse to make the boy leave her alone. But the heir seemed to deliberately perceive all of Mrs. Words as concern and compliments. Alamond was young and foolish enough to fall for the discreet provocations of the Duke's daughter. So Araline freely took advantage of the fact that the boy readily agreed to try different sweets. Even in such a situation, the little girl could not calmly talk to the prince alone. Seeing their conversation, the other children of the aristocrats cast angry glances at the Duke's daughter, whom they disliked. Previously, all of Peshin's attention was evenly distributed among all of his many friends, so the heroine quickly realized how popular the prince really was. This cheerful boy easily attracted everyone around him, not only with his status, but also with his behavior. The girl was surprised by how different the prince was from the classic hero in all the novels. She tried not to get close to him, since she had no place in this man's history anyway. But the lady found it difficult to distance herself, since the heir's behavior was too attractive. At this point, Peshin sheepishly asked Miss to call him by his first name, and not formally. This request was so contrary to the heroine's plan that she froze in place in surprise. Araline could not allow herself to address His Highness more closely, even though he insisted. Once again, the Duke's daughter could not find the strength to refuse the boy she was trying to avoid. The child's face broke into a joyful smile when the little girl finally fulfilled his request. As a result, it was only after several hours that the heroine was able to ask for permission to return to the Halban estate. But as soon as the lady approached the exit, her path was blocked by the Empress's assistants. Araline was surprised that Madame Mazzini wanted to meet with her personally right now. This woman even today amazed everyone with her beauty and grace, which began in her youth. This is precisely why she was once able to choose such a successful marriage with the future emperor. So the girl felt awkward meeting such an influential person alone. But the Empress herself, upon seeing the Duke's daughter, invited her to the dinner table with a smile. From the very beginning of the conversation, Azani acted as if it was normal for her to invite children over. Araline was completely taken aback by the sweet and sociable behavior of the lady who resembled Passion. What made the lady most uncomfortable was that she had just recently eaten with the Crown Prince. But Azani smiled so kindly at the Duke's daughter that she could not refuse another treat. The little girl had no idea that the Empress knew more about her than she actually thought. Since Madame suddenly started talking about the past, Miss simply sat motionless and listened. But Araline was interested in the words that she reminded the woman of someone important. However, Azani did not reveal her secrets, as this was not accepted in high society. The heroine had no information about this woman, since she was rarely mentioned in the plot. So the girl cautiously asked why Madame had invited her to this personal meeting in the first place. In response, Azani smiled sweetly and admitted that she was curious to see the Duke's daughter. The woman also wanted to apologize for her active son's recent behavior. All these words were accompanied by even more sweets on the table, which made the lady feel ill. But the Empress seemed to the little girl to be a good person who was sincerely interested in her. Madame even asked why Araline didn't play too much with the other children of the aristocrats. Hearing the complaint about poor health, the woman nodded understandingly and allowed him to contact her. The girl was pleased with such unexpected patronage, which could help her in the future. However, in reality, the little girl just wanted to no longer participate in other children's gatherings. But Azani had no intention of considering this issue, as she had specifically included Miss in the group. This circumstance caused a lot of trouble for the heroine, who would have preferred to spend time at home with a book. So Azani turned out to be far from as simple as she pretended to be in order to please everyone around her. After meeting her, the lady was even more exhausted, and yet she still had to attend children's meetings. No matter how hard Araline tried to distance herself from the boy, he was always right next to her. But the heroine initially planned to silently observe the character's growth from the sidelines. Even Azani didn't bother to explain to the little girl why she needed to go to a children's group at all. The girl's intuition told her that her father and the Empress were somehow connected to each other. But the lady didn't have time to finish her thought because two twins, Noel and Ciel, were sent to her. Araline diligently pretended not to notice the boys, who were demanding communication from her. But wherever the little girl went, her brothers followed her everywhere, trying to attract attention. So, in the end, the heroine still had to communicate with new annoying acquaintances. The twins happily introduced themselves to the girl in the hope that she would remember their names. In fact, the Duke's daughter remembered everything about them from the book, but she didn't tell anyone about this detail. The little girl became tense when her brothers began to inquire about her weak physical abilities. They even promised to reward Araline generously if she showed them her fainting spell. But such a proposal did not interest the lady at all, who wanted to get as far away as possible. For the first time in their lives, Noel and Ciel were faced with the fact that someone didn't care about their appearance and behavior. The boys tried to boost their self-esteem at the girl's expense by demanding that she give them nice compliments. They pretended that only ladies would be allowed to touch their lush eyelashes and soft cheeks. But the heroine knew perfectly well that if she became embarrassed, these guys would laugh at her for the rest of her life. So the little girl didn't do anything that the twins were cunningly suggesting to her. As a result, Miss caused some kind of ominous glint in the boys' eyes, which she didn't need at all. Araline tried to get past the boys before it was too late for her to get away from them. But it turned out that the actions of the Duke's daughter only made Noel and Ciel more interested in her. The boys were sure that the girl was carrying out her cunning plan to attract their attention. For some reason, when the heroine wanted to be alone, everyone around her seemed to stick to her even more. At that very moment, Passion appeared in time and drove the twins away with one movement. Never before had the Duke's daughter experienced such relief at the sight of the prince, almost on a white horse. The baby was uncomfortable with the attention from the twins, so she remained grateful to the heir. But Noel and CL themselves had no intention of leaving the lady entirely in the care of their friend. So the Speron brothers set about convincing Alamend that they were friends with Araline. The prince blushed visibly as the boys turned their interrogation on him while talking about the lady, and the little girl herself at that moment tried to quietly hide from the company that was undesirable for her. But before Miss had time to go far, she accidentally bumped into another one of her close friends. This was the future best swordsman in the world, Harun Muvisk, who was distinguished by his calm character and manners. The lady froze in surprise right in front of the boy, who did not dare to be the first to break the silence. But the Duke's daughter did not have long to enjoy the peace because the boys remembered her. Seal and Noel asked if Arelin wanted to play only with them in the near future, while Peshen tried to attract the girl to his side in order to win the argument between his friends. In confusion, Araline grabbed Harun by the sleeve and declared that she wanted to go for a walk with him. This is because in the original story, no one showed any interest in the heroine's character. Although her house was quite famous, even that was little mentioned in the story. The entire Halban family was used only as a key to the development of further events, while other families played a really important role in the novel, moving the plot forward. So Miss sincerely could not understand why she again found herself in the center of attention, not only of Peshen. Moreover, Araline was now surrounded by the rest of the guys from the main story, which did not make her happy. Only Harun maintained a mysterious silence, but he also glanced at the Duke's daughter. So somehow, miraculously, all these important characters gathered around the heroine. At the moment, the baby was most interested in Muviska's son, who would remain faithful to one lady. Although he himself was not thrilled that he was dragged into such company instead of training. Unlike Araline, Harun was given more time as a supporting character. Throughout the story, he has shown incredible devotion to his beautiful beloved. Suddenly, another fork of delicious food began to approach the Duke's daughter's face. The little girl immediately looked pitifully at Muvisk, hoping that he would save her from this. It turned out, however, that the future knight had misunderstood everything and began feeding the lady himself. Only Peshen, out of jealousy, saved the girl from overeating, not allowing her to eat the piece from her other hand. But the boy did this only to then offer the sweets from his plate. Harun was noticeably embarrassed by what had happened, since he had only been trying to help. But the only way to save the heroine was to go to the estate, which none of the boys allowed her to do. While the boys were chatting happily among themselves, the lady was furiously tearing into the innocent food. From the very beginning, the little girl felt trapped in this company with no way out. That's why in her head the heroine counted down the seconds until she went home. Only with the onset of evening did the entire company finally disperse to their estates. Meccan met his ward, who rushed into his arms as fast as she could when they met. The little girl happily inhaled the now familiar scent of paper emanating from Le Borgen. From childhood, the manager carefully raised the miss, for which she was grateful to him. But only now, calling the man Mom, was Araline able to become much closer to him. The manager still hadn't gotten used to the way the Duke's daughter addressed him, but he didn't dare disappoint the girl by forbidding her to call him that. The man was most interested in how the meeting of friends went this time, but the heroine could only complain about how troublesome it was for her to play with her friends. Leiborgen noticed that the little girl was not very keen to tell him about her adventures. But then the lady asked the guardian if she could no longer attend the weekly meetings. All the servants immediately began signaling to Mayhen that he should never make such a decision. But the man promised the little girl that he would come up with a reason for refusal next time. In response, the heroine joyfully hugged the manager, who so easily took her side. So Leiborgen ignored the displeased looks of the servants who were against it. The assistants wanted Araline to engage in some physical activity. Therefore, they decided to take on all the responsibilities of distracting the young lady from loneliness. And so, a few days later, the time came for another meeting of the children of aristocrats in the palace. On this day, for the first time in a long time, the heroine planned not to get out of her bed. Mayhen kept his promise, so the lady was excused from attending the meeting. This delighted Miss, who was increasingly beginning to consider Leiborgen her mother. She enjoyed the peace and quiet in the room, enjoying the solitude. But after just a few hours, the clingy assistants wouldn't give Miss a break. Araline barely managed to get rid of the servants, who were only trying to do what was best for her. So the maids were shocked when the girl admitted that she did not want to be near them. The little girl ran as fast as she could away from the noise that was constantly around her. Miss had no idea that she had only motivated her assistants to look for her even more. The little girl found out about this when she was accidentally walking down the hallway in search of silence. Until recently, all the assistants behaved quietly, but something changed in their thoughts. That's why the heroine visibly tensed up when she noticed Ern the butler behind her. But the man promised that he would not follow the lady as closely as the maids. He enjoyed watching the girl from the shadows, constantly protecting her from trouble. It turned out that all the servants remaining in the estate had taken an oath to serve Araline. It was for this reason that the maids were so worried about the condition of their beloved young mistress. But the heroine herself did not see the point in such actions, since she was living well. She didn't find the behavior of the previous maids shocking, as she had encountered similar behavior. Until now, Araline didn't know what ultimately happened to the girls who laughed at her. The manager carefully concealed any information about the incident from the girl. From that very moment on, the lady's life became as if no one had ever laughed at her before. It took Araline a moment to realize that she was never alone because of the help of her faithful servants. Ern, with a cheerful smile, confirmed the heroine's suspicions that everyone was trying for her sake. The little girl couldn't even imagine that men had tried so hard to make her life easier. As a result, the girl was so deep in thought that she did not manage to escape from the maids in time. Since Miss no longer had a chance to leave, she allowed them to take care of herself. But as a result, Araline only became more exhausted, as if she had gone to a meeting. The girl did not understand why the assistants were making her peaceful life so difficult. The only thing that was clear to the heroine was that at this rate she would die not from illness, but from stress. The maids were full of eternal enthusiasm to help the lady with any of her actions in life. And Mayhem was so busy that he didn't notice how Miss was suffering from constant care. This could not go on any longer, so the little girl took charge of her future. The next day, the little girl gave everyone a message about a general meeting in the living room. She brought with her hand-drawn charts of good and bad grades. Araline wasn't about to tolerate any unnecessary attention, so she rated the work. The assistants couldn't ignore the fact that the lady would be giving them stickers. The maids were especially delighted when they noticed that their names were written on the pieces of paper. And the heroine prepared so well that she even took out and drew special stickers. Hearing a noise in the corridors, Mayhem left the room to figure out what was going on. He didn't have time to finish all the work, but he couldn't stand aside when something incomprehensible was happening. The little girl joyfully ran up to her guardian, whom she had not seen for several days. Leiborgen immediately assumed that the detachment of assistants had tormented the lady too much. But the lady cleverly distracted the manager by giving him the first sticker. Arelin sweetly stated that Mayhem had always worked hard, which was why he was now being rewarded. The manager couldn't resist such pleasant praise, so he let things slide. Only after this cunning plan was the heroine finally able to enjoy the silence. The sticker idea was so successful that it captured the imagination of all the servants in the estate. Miss was glad that the assistants did their job and interfered less with her. But the heroine had no idea that her quiet life was not destined to last long. She was reading an interesting book with pleasure, not suspecting that she would soon be interrupted. It was only when Peshen's loud voice thundered throughout the estate that Araline realized everything. The boy couldn't stand being separated from the girl, so he personally came to visit her. At first, the prince was simply upset that the lady had missed another meeting. Green diplomatically reminded his ward that the baby was in poor health. But the heir wanted to see Arelin so much that he didn't care about propriety. While the assistant was only glad that the master could play with the children, lately the boys hated Miss more and more because the prince was next to her. So Green tried to come up with other activities for the boy to distract him. But he quickly realized that all of Peshen's thoughts were consumed only by Arelin. The boy felt that he could just sit next to the lady since she was ill. The prince remembered that the duke's daughter liked to be alone in her room at the estate. But this did not in the least diminish his desire to see such a pleasant companion again. Every time the meeting with Araline dragged on, the prince felt as if they would never see each other again. Even Green could not ease the gentleman's condition, although he could usually always help him. Passion hated loneliness because he was ready to play forever with the Duke's daughter. It was for this reason that he came up with his brilliant plan to visit the little girl. But Araline was not at all happy that her quiet, everyday life had been disturbed again. Miss wanted much more to continue reading the book, but it was too late. Therefore, the heroine had to arrange a tea party with the prince, who was pleased and cheerful at the sight of her. Moreover, the boy brought with him the idea that the girl could train with him. Before, Araline had never even done a squat because it was difficult for her to just walk. But the child said that he had consulted his father's best knight on this matter. The boy couldn't calm down from the realization of how weak his close friend was. Jade was not averse to helping the prince, despite his busy training schedule. He said it was important for Araline to start by maintaining a good sleep routine. It was also necessary to monitor your diet and eat at least 3 times a day. But the most important thing for Jade was physical training, which strengthened any body. This is exactly how the knight behaved throughout his life, which is why he was in the best shape. So Passion was inspired by the idea that physical activity could help the Duke's daughter. Araline did not immediately remind him that she could not even walk for long periods of time due to her illness. The heroine never had any desire to improve her body because she could soon die. However, the prince was unaware of this nuance, so it was easy for him not to be discouraged by his illness. The girl was able to distract the boy with simple chatter, which she began to find sweet. In a fit of emotion, Passion accidentally violated the baby's boundaries and leaned close. The lady immediately stepped back delicately, but her face remained virtually unchanged. Although inside the baby was very embarrassed because it was the first time she was so close to a person. Unexpectedly, the prince reported that Araline was very beautiful when she smiled at him. Having come up with a new idea for himself, the heir decided to make the miss laugh in order to see her smile. The prince had no idea what kind of tests he was putting his assistant through when he brought him to the estate. Green had to personally report to Mayhem that he was unhappy with his appearance. The man could not find convincing arguments as to why Passion had come to visit. And the prince himself happily enjoyed the girl's company, glad that his plan had succeeded. However, the lady soon pretended that she was feeling worse due to illness. The heir was noticeably upset, but did not dare to disturb the Duke's daughter even more. The boy understood perfectly well that he might not see the girl again soon if he left. So he decided that he would personally visit her every day to play together. But Araline was not at all happy that this energetic man would come. But all the lady's refusals were useless in the face of Passion's sincere desire to help her, while the heroine was horrified that she would have to listen to her friend every day. The little girl remembered that the heir had to have many responsibilities in the imperial palace, so she didn't take his promise seriously because the boy could forget about it. Imagine Araline's surprise when she heard Passion again the next day. Somehow the child managed to combine his visits to the lady with his household duties. When the boy only promised the lady that he would visit her every day, the miss did not believe her. She believed that even an active prince would get tired of spending so much time on her. But it turned out that the boy was not at all tired of constant communication. He visited Arellen with enviable frequency, arriving at practically the same time. And each time the child dragged the little girl along with him, despite all her objections about it. It even got to the point that Passion began to monitor the proper nutrition of the Duke's daughter, while the heroine could not understand where she had sinned so much that her child was tormenting her. Even with all his status as heir, he invaded foreign territory every day. Therefore, the little girl hoped that the assistants would not ignore such a violation. But the servants were so filled with love for the young master that they themselves joyfully greeted him. The boy saw that he had admirers in this house too, which made him turn his nose up even higher. So, in the entire estate, the lady was left completely alone without a single savior from her friend. At the very beginning, Miss tried to influence the prince's visit through Labourgan, but failed. The girl was still sad that even the manager had given permission for visits. But the cheerful Passion did not allow the little girl to get bogged down in her gloomy thoughts for even a minute. Miss was unable to cope with the pressure from the Emperor's heir on her own. And all the maids, without exception, were delighted that their mistress no longer walked alone. Even Ern thought the boy had a beneficial effect on the lady who usually locked herself in her room. So Araline decided to resort to more brutal measures to get rid of her friend. As soon as they finished eating, the heroine rudely asked if the prince had other things to do. The boy did not expect to hear such coldness from the lips of the girl for whom he tried so hard. The duke's daughter was sure that the young gentleman's schedule was full from morning until evening. Therefore, she could not find an answer to how he managed to stay visiting for so long. But Peshin himself saw no obstacles to going for frequent walks with the girl. He took the little girl's hand tightly, wanting to show her a few more amazing places. The heroine stared at the child's hand in surprise, as her feelings were new to her. The girl had never had real friends before, and she didn't understand how to behave. And now the cheerful Peshin brightened up Aralina's everyday life, even if the lady resisted it. In her past life, the heroine was surrounded by similar people who always tried to help her in everything. But back then, her mother's approval was so important to the girl that she didn't communicate with anyone. And in the end, all the previously good friends left the lady completely alone with Smiles. Only those who were interested in money and status stayed around Miss the longest. Before the heroine had time to realize this, she began to care only about achieving success. Initially, the girl thought that everything would be fine even without friends, because she had a mother. At the sight of her, the lady smiled joyfully and threw herself into her arms to feel the long-awaited warmth. The subconscious mind remembered well the pain of the mother abandoning her daughter after one incident. And so now, in Arelin's body, the girl was afraid that she would experience terrible emotions again. After getting closer to Peshin, Miss increasingly had nightmares about her mother leaving. Although the little girl liked the cheerful prince who pulled her out of bed every day. But the fear of being alone again with a huge pain in my chest was much stronger than attachment. As usual, Dylan not only fulfilled his duties, but also consoled the general manager. This time, Mehen was worried about the increasing number of visits from the crown prince. The assistant immediately noticed how thoughtful Leborgan's usually calm face was. The man couldn't get the duke's daughter, whose portrait he placed on his desk, out of his head. Dylan could clearly see how much Mehen cared for the girl, although he himself did not realize it. Until now, Leborgan had been discovering emotions in himself for the lady who amazed him with her antics. The assistant reminded the manager that Miss needed friends her own age in her life. And Mehen couldn't argue with the fact that Dylan was much more experienced when it came to children. This was all because the assistant had many nephews, whom he happily took care of. The Empress also asked her son about his communication with the Duke's daughter during their conversations. Peshin always talked with great pleasure about his adventures with his friend. Suddenly, the mother advised the boy not to get too carried away with communicating with the girl. She knew much that she could not tell even the Duke of Halban and his servants. So Madame had the right to worry that sooner or later the children would separate from each other. As a result, the Emperor's son remained thoughtful after this meeting with his previously harmless mother. The boy still couldn't understand why the Empress gave him such strange relationship advice. Azini promised that when the time came, the baby would make the right choice in the form of a girl. Therefore, Peshin was perplexed as to whether his mother did not like the Duke's beautiful daughter. But the heir did not even want to consider such a sad option for him, so as not to worry. As always, Peshin decided to take fate into his own hands so that Araline would definitely please her mother in the future. Meanwhile, the heroine tried to understand why the boy became so attached to her. Over the past few days, the little girl did everything to make the child hate her properly. But the Emperor's son seemed not to notice all the lady's cold attempts to finally distance herself from him. One day, the little girl even locked herself in her room for the whole day, not wanting to see the energetic boy. At that moment, the maids played with the prince to smooth over the awkward moment a little. While Araline could clearly hear how the prince was worried about her condition, wanting to see her as soon as possible. But all this did not stop Aliment from cheerfully appearing again at the Halban estate the next day. The Duke's daughter looked at the baby with disdain when he came to visit her uninvited. Although the maids warned that the lady was not in the mood, the boy was not at all confused by this. From the outside, the girl could clearly see how good the Crown Prince's communication skills were. Miss was lost in thought, so she unexpectedly met Passion's gaze. Araline didn't want to communicate with the boy at all, but he thought so when he saw the little girl. The prince's grip was such that he easily opened the doors, despite the resistance of the duke's daughter. So the girl once again had to listen to the funny stories of her overly intrusive young friend. Miss still considered the way the boy communicated with her problematic, but she could not do anything to fix it. The problem was that Passion was practically the perfect friend for a lady, so she couldn't find any reason to legitimately escape from his excessive communication. As the child continued to speak, Araline became so tired that she froze in place in the hallway. It took a lot of effort for the girl to start a sharp conversation with her good friend. Alamand was taken aback when he encountered unexpectedly cold communication directed at him. An awkward atmosphere immediately fell between the children as nothing was conducive to such communication. Previously, no one dared to speak rudely to the heir, since everyone around was afraid of the difference in status. The miss hoped to anger the boy enough that he would no longer dare bother her. It turned out that Passion was only glad that Arelin turned her attention to him. Now the child could consider them full-fledged friends, since the little girl stopped being shy about communication. The heroine couldn't understand why the boy only became more happy when she started speaking rudely. Miss was very afraid of falling under the influence of a child again, whom she found it difficult to refuse anything. Therefore, the lady declared that she would never again speak disrespectfully to the prince. No matter how hard the duke's daughter tried to offend the heir, he still did not want to leave her. The difficulty of the task even made the little girl gradually begin to give up, which she really didn't want to do. And Passion continued to smile cheerfully at Arelin, believing that she had simply come up with another game for herself. As a result, that same evening, the heroine snuggled up to Mehen's leg in search of long-awaited consolation. All the lady's energy had been exhausted during the day of communicating with the prince, so she was resting like this. Leiborgen, out of stubbornness, at first did not respond to the girl's call, who again called him Mommy. But the man's heart could not tolerate the miss's sad voice for long, so he responded anyway. Although Araline knew perfectly well who the manager was for her, she needed a close relative. As soon as the man took the miss in his arms, she asked him to fulfill one small request of hers. Macon reminded that he was the one who had to express wishes for the number of stickers that he managed to collect. Leiborgen couldn't even imagine what the lady would ask him for, but he could have bought her anything. But it turned out that the little girl only wanted the manager to read her a bedtime story. The man was confused by such a simple request from the duke's daughter, who could get everything in the world. Despite the huge amount of work, he did not refuse to fulfill the little girl's small request. More than anything, Mehen wanted to see a happy smile on Arelin's face, and everything else was unimportant. Although Leiborgen could not devote much time to the girl, he did not ignore her rare requests for something. On the way to the room, it turned out that the little girl was not at all happy due to her constant meetings with the prince. This surprised the manager because Dylan had told him that everything was fine between the children. Araline herself could hardly explain what exactly confused her about the daily games with the heir. What surprised the lady most was how kind and good the ever-smiling boy seemed to her. Against this background, the heroine felt increasingly angry, but she did not want to hurt other people. Mehen once again noticed how grown-up the duke's daughter was inside, although she remained a child on the outside. She herself quickly put an end to this sad conversation as soon as they came into the room to read a book. But despite Araline's smile, Leiborgen had a feeling that something bad was about to happen. A few years ago, for some unclear purpose, the Empress came up with the idea of a children's group. And at this event, it was her brilliant and bright son who attracted the most attention. Only this time, even the twins were bored with the same games that were repeated at the meetings. The boys were ready to move mountains, just to avoid getting bored from idleness because they had a lot of energy. This was all because, as usual, Araline did not come to this meeting, and the kids liked to tease the heir. So now they have lost a very good opportunity to laugh at the young Prince Passion. One of the brothers knew important news, which he had not yet managed to tell his handsome twin. It turned out that Alamend had been secretly meeting with Araline while everyone else was studying in the estates. This caused the fire of revenge to ignite in the hearts of the boys, who had nowhere to spend their energy. Therefore, the next day, from the very morning, they began to closely monitor the prince. Noel and Ciel were surprised at how carefully their friend studied all the huge lessons given by the teachers. Immediately after finishing his studies, the boy went to have his daily tea with his mother, whom he loved madly. But the prince's studies did not end there, because he then began training with swords with knights. The twins were tired even just watching Passion's busy schedule, which he never complained about. Although the servants had long noticed the presence of the two children of aristocrats, they did not say anything to the master. During training, Jade noticed that his protégé was more absent-minded than usual this time. Alamend really couldn't concentrate because of thoughts about the serious illness of the Duke's daughter. As a result, all the trainees formed a meeting to resolve this difficult issue for the sake of Aralina's health. The guys had no medical training, so they resolved all issues only through sports, so they unanimously agreed that the lady should start doing physical exercise. Only Passion was sad about the fact that the baby couldn't even walk normally on her feet. But the assistants didn't see a problem with this, because it was always necessary to at least simply start training. This simple answer inspired the prince to new achievements in matters concerning his beloved friend. Green realized too late that the young gentleman was once again planning something bad towards Araline. The heroine herself felt that it would be better for her not to meet the prince today, but she did not have time to escape from him. The first thing the boy did instead of greeting her was offer the little girl to train under his supervision. He was so inspired that he was not going to let the Duke's daughter slack off this time. Out of pure enthusiasm, the boy dragged the lady along with him so that they could take a short walk together on the street. In case Arelin fainted, the prince came up with a reliable means of assistance. The heroine didn't know if this kind of communication was normal for the 7-year-old children they were. But the boy was smiling so happily next to me that he brushed aside all the doubts inside. As a result, the little girl once again could not refuse the cheerful air, although she only wanted to run away from him. On the way, Passion became curious about why the girl was always alone when he went home. At first, Araline didn't understand what the question was about because there were a servant and a manager next to her. But it turned out that the prince was asking about the Mrs. parents and was astonished when the lady reported that they were not there. Alamand was visibly embarrassed by the fact that he had so rudely intruded into personal space, which could be painful. But the heroine did not experience any emotions about the lack of love, since she did not see it. The girl did not expect that the boy would suddenly promise to replace her failed family. The heir spoke completely seriously, since he truly wanted to always remain close to Arelin. Only the little girl understood how dangerous the words of her stupid, albeit cheerful, friend were. The heroine was not immune to warmth and care, so she unconsciously smiled back at the child. But nightmares immediately emerged from the subconscious, reminding her of those who left the girl alone. Any attachment to another person could later turn into pain and a wound in the heart for the lady. This made the Duke's daughter jump back in fear from the child, who sincerely wished her well-being and health. Passion could never have guessed what horrors tormented Araline's mind, that she acted in such a way. The heroine shrank back with fear, because even in this life she could not overcome herself for the sake of future happiness. The lady was not part of this world, and besides, she was supposed to die soon, so she did not need connections. Therefore, Araline cruelly demanded that the prince never come to visit her again. On this sad note, the little girl left the boy who tried so hard to improve her life with his presence. This moment was clearly seen from the first rows of bushes by the twins, who had been watching the prince all day. But even for the boys, it was a shock that the prince cried so bitterly for the first time in his life because of what had happened. As soon as the boy returned to the palace, the servants began running around his room with anxiety. The maids were sincerely worried that the young master returned with tear-stained eyes. It was Green who was hurt the most, because it was he who allowed Passion to play alongside the rough Araline. Previously, the heir would certainly have been amused by an acting show or delicious food, but now it didn't work. Alamond locked himself in his room and paid attention only to his beloved kitten. The assistant tried to find out what happened at the Halban estate, but he was unsuccessful. The prince remained silent, and only his convulsive sighs showed that the boy was barely holding back from crying. Green realized that the problem was much more serious than he thought, so it could not be solved so easily. Unlike the Imperial Palace, from that moment on, an almost deathly silence reigned at the Halban estate. Araline locked herself in her room and did not want to let anyone in, not even answering questions. The maid saw the girl return in a gloomy state without her friend, which only meant something bad. But the lady did not make contact, so the assistants themselves came up with what could have happened. Only Leiborgen had the right to enter the Duke's daughter's room, but he was in no hurry to tell what he saw there. Since the man had too little information, he gathered all the servants for a general meeting. Mayhen's head was already splitting from the amount of things to do, and now there was the unclear situation with Arelin. When the manager visited the girl, he found her in a sad state on his bed. The little girl could barely speak through the tears that constantly flowed down her small cheeks. It was not the first time that the man thought about how difficult it was to raise young children alone. The maids were of the same opinion because they could not understand the train of thought of their beloved mistress. Mayhen was the first to speak and asked his assistants for advice on how to somehow cheer up Arelin. Rena immediately cheerfully suggested to Leiborgen that they put on a puppet theatre, which had recently delighted the little girl. Ern remembered that the lady was interested in art exhibitions, and it would be possible to bring her some paintings. Only Uni suggested that Meekan go somewhere for one day with his ward. This idea was met with coldness from the other assistants, who considered it very stupid. So the faithful servant immediately fell silent, afraid to talk about anything else in the near future. But before the assistants had time to deal with poor Uni, Mayhen put an end to this circus and ended the meeting. The man's thoughts were consumed by the fact that Araline could truly be happy next to him. It was not for nothing that the girl herself asked the manager to periodically devote a little time to her. He believed that it was not too late to do something to help the little girl cope with her emotions. And at that moment, the heroine listened to the silence in the estate, but could not enjoy it as usual. The girl's eyes were swollen from the huge amount of tears that had flowed from them recently. The small glimmers of light on the bed reminded the lady of her past, connected with her cruel mother. Then the woman with crazy eyes said that her beloved daughter was a ray of light in a dark world. But the mother was not always so obsessed, because before she herself played the violin brilliantly, enjoying the fame. It was just one emergency caused by her husband that changed everything in the woman's life. And from then on, she began to place all her hopes on her little daughter, who took up music. The mother never asked what her daughter really wanted, because it didn't matter to her at all. And the girl felt that if she didn't play, she would immediately lose interest from her relative. The heroine did not want to admit the fact that Madame needed a child, only to make her dream come true. Therefore, as soon as the lady refused to perform, she was immediately met with her mother's angry gaze. That day, Miss truly understood what it was like to be left completely alone. The callous woman was no longer interested in her daughter, who was unwilling to fulfill her demands. The father came to his daughter only a few months later, but he only spoke about how hard it was for the mother. None of the adults thought about what their daughter was going through at that moment, because they were too selfish. After a few more months of the heroine's reclusive life, she saw something that shocked her. The father and mother were on the television screen as the woman finally won the violin competition. They were so happy, despite the fact that they had so cruelly abandoned their own daughter alone. In her new life, little has changed for the girl, as she has never even seen her parents. Just when the lady had completely given up, she met the bright and handsome Peshen. The boy genuinely attracted the girl with his cheerfulness, but her fears were too great. Araline did not want to upset this kind child with her death, which would happen in a few years. Through her tears, the little girl saw that Meekan had come to her again, although she had expected to remain alone. But the manager did not allow the Duke's daughter to suffer alone because he wanted to make her happy. Therefore, Leiborgen put aside all his affairs and suggested that the lady go for a walk in the city the next day. The heroine had never travelled so far before, so she became interested in this offer. The next morning, Dylan was struck by the sudden change in the atmosphere in the manager's office. Just yesterday evening, work papers and important documents with work reports were scattered on the table. But today, it was decorated with various booklets and tourist brochures with a choice of travel destinations. Mayhan himself seemed not to notice the drastic changes that had happened to him in just one night. The assistant did not say anything to the gentleman, although he now felt awkward in his company. Together they quickly chose a small town that was famous for its water magic. Leiborgen was glad that the town was close to the estate, so he could return quickly. Dylan only had time to wish the gentleman a good trip before he rushed out of the office. The assistant was uneasy about the manager leaving the estate for the first time in a long time for a walk. Since there was no less work to do, the guy took it on himself, just to make Leiborgen's work easier. But Dylan had something in mind that Mayhan would definitely hide from him if he found out about it. But the man went on a trip with the girl and was unaware of his assistant's insidious plan. The city immediately struck travelers with its beauty, wealth, and prosperity. The manager couldn't remember the last time he went on a trip that wasn't for work. He was pleased that the little girl noticeably perked up at the sight of an unfamiliar but interesting environment. Mayhan felt a sense of relief, as he was worried that Uni's idea might not work with the girl. But Aralyn was surprisingly attentive to her surroundings, asking a lot of questions. The only thing is, the lady didn't really like the large crowd of people, but it couldn't be avoided. But Miss was impressed by the water magic barrier that arose due to the construction of the city on the lake. Then a child ran past the Duke's daughter with a joyful cry to meet his parent. Immediately after this, the heroine began to notice the happy faces of children and their fathers and mothers from many sides. Leiborgen realized too late that the young lady had begun to look at full-fledged families. Aralyn momentarily lost touch with reality as she felt a dull pain in her chest at the sight of the children and adults. But the lady remembered that Mayhan had agreed to be her mother, so she did not suffer too much. No matter how much the manager resisted, this role finally stuck to him until Miss grew up. The baby could not call Leiborgen Papa only because the Duke was still alive, although he had not come. In any case, the man sincerely enjoyed spending time with Aralyn, no matter how she perceived him. Along the way, Mayhan noticed that the girl was looking with interest at the beautiful bouquets that were sold on the streets. He bought one of these for Aralyn and was rewarded with a grateful smile from the timid little girl. For the first time in a long time, the heroine enjoyed what was happening around her in this city. The Duke's daughter's mood noticeably improved due to the care that Leiborgen showed her. But this joy was short-lived, as the heroine remembered her imminent death. Therefore, she asked Mayhan not to bury her in the grave, but to decorate the dead body with delicate flowers. The manager was shocked to discover that the girl was actually well aware of the state of her body. More than anything in the world, the heroine wanted to be in a place where no one would come for her. It was for this reason that the lady was so against the grave that other people had to visit it. It was at this awkward moment that one of the street performers invited the girl and the man to play a game. Mayhan was not in the mood for this, but the Miss took advantage of this good opportunity to change the subject. Aralyn was sure that Leiborgen would not be able to refuse her desire to take part in some activity. The rules of the game were very simple and resembled rescuing a princess from a dragon in a high tower. All court adults will be locked in a room where they will be able to see their children through a magic ball. But the kids will have to solve complex riddles in a special estate in order to get out. Only those who are the first to get out will have the honor of being called the true heroes of the mansion. After explaining all the simple rules, the host activated the ball so that people could see the children in the estate. Leiborgen was in such a bad mood that he was not ready to follow the game with everyone else. But then, out of the corner of his eye, the man noticed a familiar silhouette on the screen that shouldn't have been there. Out of anger, Mayhan even accidentally broke his sphere, just so he wouldn't have to see the crown prince's face. Meanwhile, the heroine had already managed to run into the boy who had left her in tears last time. This time, the prince looked no worse than usual, despite all the stress he had recently experienced. Like the lady, he froze in surprise in front of her, since he did not expect to see her in such a place so soon. This game was so large-scale that it used an entire estate for entertainment. It included some scary elements to make it more interesting for children to play, but the heroine wasn't afraid of such difficulties since she was used to scary faces. The girl happily solved problems and enjoyed using her mental abilities. And while opening one of the doors, the lady accidentally stumbled upon Peshen in the room. The little girl didn't expect that her distraction from her friend would ultimately lead directly to him. The prince was instantly overjoyed at the sight of the girl, whom he had not seen for some time. But the duke's daughter closed the door in panic, as she did not want to communicate with the child now. The lady could not understand why the boy ended up in the same game when he should be in the palace. While the door was closed, Miss made an attempt to carefully run away further away. But just a few seconds later, the air began to break down the thin door. So the little girl had to quickly run away, just so that Passion wouldn't find her. Alamund was used to playing hide-and-seek, so he quickly guessed what hiding place the miss had chosen. Arelyn had no choice but to run away from the boy in panic. She abruptly slammed another door right in his face, not wanting to continue the conversation. The heroine's body was so weak that she could no longer run away from the air. The duke's daughter was so out of breath that the world before her eyes almost went black before she fainted. But Passion had no intention of giving up, as he could easily knock down another door to the estate. The lady clung with all her might to the only barrier that saved her from the Emperor's son. After the girl's arguments, the boy became quiet for a while, but she continued to listen. Alamond was delighted that he was actually able to meet his friend so quickly. While Miss suspected him of spying on her, otherwise how could the boy get into the same game? In the end, the prince himself admitted that he had indeed followed the girl into the game. But the duke's daughter made it clear that the child should never come near her again. But this was completely contrary to the wishes of the heir, so he did not obey. Never before had the lady encountered such incredible stubbornness in response to her words. Passion categorically refused to leave Miss alone, since he could not understand the reasons for this. The heir understood perfectly well that he was behind closed doors, but he wanted the best for the girl. At this moment, the heroine became completely confused because she was truly afraid of being alone. The little girl could not understand why the prince was resisting and trying to be friends with him. Alamend himself felt sad about the whole situation that was happening between them. He still clearly remembered the moment when the duke's daughter asked him not to come to her. And then the baby's face was so sad that the prince could not leave her alone. Despite all the lady's cruel words, she looked as if she was hurting herself. Only in his palace did the child realize that all this time his friend had been afraid of being rejected. And now, when he had a chance to talk, the boy was firm in his decision to help her. The heroine could not find any reason for anyone to be friends with such a boring person like her. In response, Passion admitted that he knew that the girl did not like him, since she often avoided him. But the thing was that he liked Arelyn, and he could only think about her. It was for this reason that the prince did not consider the duke's beautiful and intelligent daughter boring. The lady could hardly hold back her tears when she listened to such pleasant words addressed to her. Passion's trembling voice hinted that the boy himself was experiencing similar emotions now. Mrs. Hands was shaking from excessive fear because she wanted to run away from responsibility. But, contrary to her usual actions, this time Arelyn pulled away from the pain in her chest. With tears in her eyes, she opened the door because she wanted to see her friend's face. Passion did not immediately realize that he had finally been able to reach the heart of his beloved friend. Arelyn immediately warned that their closeness could ultimately lead to both of them getting hurt. However, the heir was naively confident that no one would make them suffer together. The boy didn't care about any evil rumors, since he didn't pay attention to them anyway. But Miss hardly believed that everything would really be fine, but she couldn't refuse. The heroine was prepared for the fact that in a few months the child would completely forget her. After all, he was the main character in this story, and she was soon to die of illness. But only once in her life did the little girl want to make real friends with someone. It was only for this reason that the girl took the first step towards the active crown prince. She quietly whispered that she still didn't like the boy, even though they became friends. But for the cheerful Passion, it was enough that he himself loved the beautiful and intelligent Arelina. The boy's next bright smile made the girl's heart beat faster with joy. The heroine only now realized that she had simply wasted time trying to escape from her friend. A little later, only Arelyn felt awkward after the reconciliation conversation. The heir was so happy to meet the girl that he forgot about all the emotions he had received. True, he did not admit who exactly sent him to this city and this game. In response to all of the Duke's daughter's questions, the heir tried to get rid of them with a sweet smile, so as not to say anything. So the little girl again began to ignore the Crown Prince's annoying questions. Peshen turned out to be incredibly bad at solving riddles using logic, but Arelyn was able to easily open various chests in the location without breaking them. Alamand openly admired the skills of the Duke's daughter, which were beyond his reach. Together they were able to find a map that would lead to a locked room with adults. If the lady left Mayhen there, then the prince asked Green to play along with him again for a while. The children were only too happy to rescue their princesses, who were imprisoned outside the estate. But then Peshen heard a strange noise from the statue, which was supposed to remain motionless. Only now did the boy realize that he hadn't seen other children on this playground for a long time. Miss did not pay any attention to these words, as she wanted to get out as quickly as possible. However, Arelyn also suddenly felt something terrible, causing all her instincts to scream in horror. The little girl was overcome by a wild desire to run away, but she had no idea where the exit was. At the last moment, the heroine pushed the prince to safety, rather than running away herself. As a result, the girl found herself inside an incomprehensible space that swallowed her up, and the heir fell in the middle of an ordinary and quiet street, which was filled with people. Peshen did not immediately realize what exactly had happened and why Arelyn was not near him. Green, who was located near the magical exit, ran up to the child almost immediately. The assistant explained that the mansion's settings had been compromised, and they had difficulty getting the children out. However, despite all their efforts, the adults were never able to find Peshen and Arelina. Mayhen was still trying to rescue the lady, so he didn't immediately notice the prince. Meanwhile, the heroine woke up in a dark and cold place, which was another mansion. The little girl struggled to get to her feet, as she felt unwell after what had happened. She remembered that she had managed to push Peshen aside, but she had not been able to get out herself. For some reason, Miss felt like she was on the verge of death, although there was nothing terrible. So, on instinct, Arelyn hid under the table in the hope that she could escape. A few seconds later, the lady heard quiet footsteps that did not sound human at all. Terrible snake eyes stared at the heroine, completely paralyzing her entire body. While the girl was frightened, the adults tried to regain control of the mansion. Mayhen was the most angry of all, threatening to punish the magicians who had done such a thing. But none of them could remove the barrier, which seemed to be fueled by someone strong from within. Leiborgen wasn't satisfied with the explanation that someone had opened a portal to another world inside. After all, this meant that anything could happen to his ward in this place. The little girl encountered a man whose name no living person could ever know. It was he who opened the otherworldly dimension in the hope that all people would be thrown out of it. This man, whose name must not be mentioned, discovered the otherworld exactly on the site of the mansion. The magician only knew that only under certain conditions could one enter another world. But the structure of that space was different from the ordinary world because monsters lived there. The guy sincerely did not understand what kind of person dared to create this place in full view of everyone. But Mayhen was only interested in whether Arelyn could return safely. However, the magician had no answer to this difficult question, which was now independent of his actions. At that very moment, the protective barrier in this world began to burn, which was strange. None of the wizards present could explain this phenomenon to each other. The men ran around in panic, trying with all their might to hold on to the crumbling defense. Leiborgen could only look in horror at the place where the girl was. But the lady herself did not even think about her loved ones, because she had her own problems at that moment. The heroine prayed that the scary man in front of her would simply pass by. She hid under the table in the hope that her breathing would not be too noticeable. Arelyn couldn't shake the feeling that she had become the prey of a huge and predatory beast. The Duke's daughter diligently looked away, pretending not to notice the man. But the magician quickly realized that the little girl was being deliberately cunning, just to avoid interacting with him. His predatory eyes stared with interest at the girl who somehow miraculously ended up here. With one snap of his finger, the magician dispelled the stranger's fear by using his magic on her. Despite his frightening appearance, he asked the lady not to be afraid of him, as she was in no danger. But Arelyn couldn't maintain eye contact with a stranger for long. Although the magician promised that nothing would threaten her, the miss felt danger from him. However, the little girl was able to ask the stranger a question about who he really was. The girl hoped that what appeared before her was not a cunning ghost chained to this place. Suddenly, the man laughed out loud when he heard such an assumption from the miss. He finally revealed that he had never tried to become someone so simple. The magician was still curious as to why this girl remained in a place where there were no living beings. What amazed him most was that the baby withstood the pressure surprisingly well. But usually people who ended up in the other world could no longer wake up from their sleep. Although the magician spoke calmly with the Duke's daughter, she was still afraid of dying. The man did not try to harm the baby in any way, but his image could have frightened anyone. Araline remembered that she was supposed to leave this world much later, but something went wrong. Suddenly, the magician whispered something under his breath, saying that their meeting was fateful. The lady was able to relax a little when she was convinced that her life was not in danger. Right now, the man was only interested in something unusual about this place that the miss could notice. Arelin immediately pointed in the direction where Peshen had recently heard some strange noise. The magician himself suspected that something strange was going on in that place, so he smiled at the girl. In gratitude, he did not leave her without attention and gave her some strange object. To the lady, it reminded her of an Easter egg, which was popular for the holiday in her world. At this point, the magician said goodbye to the miss, advising her not to let go of this item. The man disappeared as quickly as he had appeared, leaving Araline completely bewildered. She was so tired from everything she had experienced that she couldn't even get to her feet to run away. The little girl noticed that the unknown person had left a small magical shield near her. Just as the heroine was wondering why she needed him, a deafening explosion thundered. But the Duke's daughter did not have time to get up from her seat to move away from the disaster. Immediately after the explosion, the space around began to gradually collapse, sucking the lady in. As a result, the heroine fell onto the already familiar cool floor, although she thought that she would die in that world. Looking around, the girl realized that she had returned to the very estate from which she had been taken. During the move, that strange egg accidentally broke, but spread out into a mark. Araline looked with curiosity at the glowing aura that was located on her hand. The little girl had never seen such a pattern before, so she didn't know what it meant to her. At that moment, the assistants managed to stabilize the barrier so that entry could be made. Peshen was one of the first to rush to the estate, as he was worried about his friend. Mayhen ran after him, no less worried about the girl's condition. It was Leborgan who first found the baby in one of the halls, lying silently on the floor. The prince felt guilty for what happened to the miss, because at that moment she saved him. Araline felt so bad that familiar faces blurred before her eyes. No matter how hard the heir tried to bring his friend to her senses, right now it was all useless. At this moment, the Duke's daughter needed only peace and quiet to have a good rest. Araline could no longer keep her eyes open due to the fatigue that had overwhelmed her. That evening, the maids waited impatiently for the manager to return with the lady. They hoped to see a joyful smile on the face of the young lady who had gone to the city. But in the end, the girl had to be treated by several doctors at once due to her extremely serious condition. Leborgan could not find a place for himself, as he was worried about Araline's condition. However, the priest did not find any problems with the miss's health, since she was simply sleeping. The temple officials were surprised by how quickly the lady became exhausted. The manager did not want to believe that everything was okay with the lady, since she did not wake up. Even the smart priest didn't know for sure when the baby would be able to open her eyes. Therefore, they decided that the best solution would be to leave the guardian alone with Miss. The man's hands trembled with guilt, which consumed him because of the girl's condition. The maids could not help the manager in any way, as they did not know how to treat such illnesses. What hurt Uni the most was the feeling of helplessness, because this was what she had studied medicine for. But in the end, the assistant could not apply her knowledge in practice, since the case was strange. Everyone could only hope that the Duke's daughter would soon wake up on her own. Until then, Macon planned to keep watch near his ward's bed both day and night. But even after 3 days, the priest could not make the lady wake up from her long sleep. Besides Leborgan, the Crown Prince also found himself tied to the girl's bed. He watched Aralene's breathing with alarm, afraid that it would stop at any moment. Passion didn't care about the rumors from the servants that he was in love with the Duke's daughter. All the boy cared about was that the little girl would finally talk to him. Green tried his best to encourage his charge to do his homework, but the child didn't care. Alamend didn't even turn to his assistant, who was desperately calling him to reason. No matter how much the man insisted, the prince had no intention of leaving the lady even for a minute. The Emperor's son was worried that the baby might open her eyes during his absence. Green remembered that even his closest servants had failed to persuade his master, so he had temporarily retreated. The assistant could not even imagine how sad the little boy was about the loss of his friend. Never before in his life had the boy been left without the friends he needed, even for a while. Therefore, he could not take his eyes off the face of the Duke's daughter, who remained silent. Periodically, Passion checked in fear to see if she was alive, and each time he calmed down. The child tried to talk quietly to the miss so that she would not be so bored sleeping on the bed. Alamend felt strange about the emotions he was experiencing now. Just a month ago, the boy didn't even think about the girl he had never met. But now everything had changed so rapidly that he couldn't imagine life without Aralina. Even though the little girl stubbornly pushed him away, the boy was happy with everything. Initially, the heir thought that Halban, like all the other children, would quickly fall in love with him. But as time went on, it began to seem to the prince that the lady was only becoming more distant. Thinking that the little girl might disappear, the boy felt a real and deep fear. He would not like to lose the person to whom he had become deeply attached in a short period of time. At that moment, Araline saved a friend, not herself, for which she deserved respect and love. And the child would like to repay the Duke's daughter with the same efforts, and for this she must wake up. With tears in his eyes, the boy begged the lady to come to her senses so that they could continue playing. While sleeping, the heroine felt as if she was in the warm embrace of her mother. The woman was an exact copy of little Araline and smiled sunnily at her daughter. But no matter how hard the miss tried, she could not hear the voice of this lady. The baby woke up abruptly from this dream, as if she had seen some kind of nightmare. It took the lady a few minutes to realize that she was in her bed. It turned out that Passion kept his promise and never left his friend, although he himself was not asleep. The boy was so happy that Araline had come to her senses that he completely forgot about his fatigue. But the Duke's daughter was not happy that there was a nurse in the form of a prince next to her. The heir himself justified his actions by the fact that the girl had not woken up for several days. But the heroine saw no danger in the estate, where nothing had happened to her in her entire life. Therefore, she could not understand the emotions of the boy who wanted to personally catch her waking up from sleep. It was important for Passion to hear that the lady did not mind his presence in the estate at any time. But Miss always found it difficult to say anything that involved declarations of affection. The prince looked at the girl with such hope in his eyes that she would not dare to upset him. But Araline was saved from answering by the timely appearance of Mayhen, who also had not slept the whole time. The assistant was concerned about the young lady's condition, although in a little while he too would need doctors. The girl saw how exhausted the manager was, that he couldn't sleep a wink because of the baby's condition. She felt herself becoming closer to Liborgan, but she didn't expect it to affect him so much. The prince watched with interest from the sidelines the relationship between the custodian of the estate and the Duke's daughter. The boy was right when he noticed that the little girl and the man were closer than the servant and his master. Araline stated without hesitation that Mayhen had recently become like a mother to her, and that was why she loved him. The boy was surprised by these details because it seemed to him that only a woman could be a mother. But it didn't take long for the heir to get used to the fact that the roles in Aralina's life were quite disorganized. Therefore, he offered his candidacy in place of the lady's father, but she firmly rejected him. Since Passion had been staying with the girl for too long, one of the strictest teachers in the palace came for him. So the manager and the Duke's daughter were once again left alone with the servants, which they were both genuinely glad about. Although the heroine felt gratitude towards Passion, his presence was already too much. Suddenly, Liborgan opened up to his charge and admitted that he was very worried about her health. It was clear from the man's face that he had spent more than one sleepless night because of the lady's condition. The little girl had no idea that the assistant had become so attached to her recently. But the girl was not against intimacy, so she asked Leborgen to hug her tenderly. Mayhen was only too happy to touch the baby, whom he considered fragile and weak. Recently, the manager himself needed Aralene's embrace, which she shared with him. The lady admitted that she had tried her whole life to act more mature so as not to cause any problems. The man guessed that such thoughts arose in the miss, among other things, because of his previous attitude towards her. So Leborgen asked the little girl for forgiveness for leaving her alone, choosing work instead. The manager would like to rewind time so that he could behave differently towards the Duke's daughter from the very beginning. But the little girl didn't hold a drop of resentment against the adult who provided for her completely financially. Aralene believed that the man would no longer distance himself from her under strange pretexts. For the first time in all this time, Mayhen himself admitted that, as the lady's mother, he really did need to change. The heroine even initially thought that she had simply imagined it, and the man had not called himself by that nickname. Aralene could not accept the fact that Leborgen had changed so much for her well-being, and now there was no longer that prickly and stern Mayhen who frightened everyone around him with just one glance. Overjoyed, the Duke's daughter threw herself into the man's arms again to thank him for everything he had done. Since the girl did not have time to recover from sleep, she received several bruises. But what was much more important to Miss was that she had established communication with at least one adult who was trying to be her parent. Leborgen, with a gentle smile, promised that next time their walk together would go much better. The little girl had no idea that the manager, under penalty of death, forbade Dylan to tell the prince anything. The mages were still trying to figure out what was wrong with the barrier that created another space. One of them was terribly unhappy that he was the one called to such a task. The less powerful mage calmly explained that they could not identify the anomaly on their own. The powerful man did not argue any further, as it was simply a waste of time. However, even such a powerful magician did not find anything strange in the barrier that protected the city. It was logical to assume that if there was something wrong with the defense, the residents would suffer. But then the junior officer felt something strange, which he immediately reported to his superior. Listening closely, the man only now noticed that they were not alone in this place. His eyes filled with rage and anxiety, because in that world, someone powerful lived in the estate. That is why the estate was surrounded by such a deafening silence that it repelled everyone around. And the magicians had to deal with this issue before the beast broke out. They had no idea that one unknown magician was successfully protecting the estate from the beast. The only thing he was interested in was the little girl who had just recently left this place alive and well. Before, the man was bored in this world, but now he found worthy entertainment for himself. Meanwhile, the heroine looked with interest at the mark on her hand, which no one saw. Even Mayhen didn't say a word about the pleasant glow of the pattern, although he should have noticed. Instead, the manager was interested in knowing what happened to the lady in the mansion. But the little girl did not say anything, as she was afraid that it would cause even more problems. The heroine had no idea who the strange man was, because he was not mentioned in the novel. She could only hope that she hadn't gotten herself into another problematic situation. Since the lady was now being overprotected by everyone around her, she was unable to properly study the mark. And at that very moment, the manager approached the girl to report on the work done. The man was extremely pleased with his productivity and effectiveness for the benefit of Miss. In a short time, Leborgen managed to file several lawsuits against the magic towers because of what happened. Mayhen worked day and night to achieve the best results for his beloved mistress. The result was an easy and quick victory for the Halbans, as Aralene almost died in the estate. So Leborgen could also be in a good mood because of the good compensation. It turned out that Mayhen gave all the money he received to the lady as pocket money, and the first thing the little girl started talking about was giving the manager a decent bonus. She did not forget about her nannies, who lived in constant stress due to the Miss's health. All the assistants were surprised that the girl thought of them first. While Aralene was busy distributing the money, the servants recorded her behavior on video. So Leborgen refused the reward under the pretext that he had received the emotions of the Duke's daughter. The heroine did not expect that this man could be so cunning at such moments. However, the little girl still wanted to give Meekan the allowance, since he truly deserved it. While Miss was handing out the reward to everyone, Leiborgen watched her painstaking calculations with a smile. The man was glad that the little girl did not lock herself in after the strange incident in the mansion, but he still had to report what had happened to the Duke, who was in the castle in the north. Senior Knight Yaren had to personally listen to all the complaints from the servants. Although the boys had never seen the girl, they were sincerely worried about her well-being in the estate. So they pounced on Muvisk, who had learned too little information about the lady. But all these disputes were interrupted by the Duke of Halban, who suddenly returned after a hard hunt. The blood of the monsters flowed non-stop from the master's sword, but he paid no attention to it. Yaren immediately noticed that the atmosphere around the Duke was so heavy that it was difficult to speak. For some reason the Duke was despondent, but the news could not be hidden from him. So Muvisk took the risk of reporting that Araline had fainted not long ago. The man didn't show any emotion, although his fingers in his iron gloves clenched tightly. Yaren tried to tell him more about the matter, but the Duke ignored his assistant. Instead, he decided to personally figure out what happened and use the sphere. Anger permeated the master's entire aura because he could not forgive Mehen for caring so much about the girl. Mehen was completely unexpecting of a personal call from the Duke, who had hardly spoken to him. It was clear that the head of the Halban estate could not let this situation slide, but Leiborgen did not understand whether this was concern for the lady or just another whim. Previously, the manager thought that he knew his master better than anyone, but he slowly changed. Mehen's life has changed dramatically since he was brought to this estate as a young man. As a child, the boy lost his parents early on, so he wandered aimlessly through the streets. But young Mr. Halban extended a helping hand to the child and brought him into his house. But the angry glances of the distrustful assistants immediately turned to the new boy. Despite everything, the gentleman held the boy's hand tightly, not intending to let him go. So it happened that from the very beginning, Mehen trusted only one Duke of Halban. The man thought with a smile about the strange gentleman who had left all the care of the estate to him. The manager did not complain about anything, since he was quite satisfied with this life. Then the assistant came to Leiborgen with the message that someone had sent him a letter. It turned out to be an invitation from the Empress, so Mehen immediately went to her. Azeni greeted her old acquaintance, who was famous for his genius, with a gentle smile. But Leiborgen kept a respectful distance from Madame, observing all the rules. This genuinely made the woman who insisted on simple communication between them laugh. Azeni had no doubt that power had left its mark on her character. But Mehen did not dare to comment on this matter, enjoying delicious tea. Madame was worried that her son was causing a lot of trouble to the Halban estate. She called Leiborgen only to apologize if necessary. But the man honestly admitted that the boy had a positive influence on the Duke's daughter. These words noticeably consoled the madam, who was worried about her active son's behavior. The woman couldn't help but think that Araline looked like a certain beautiful lady. But Azeni didn't plan to tell anyone about his knowledge, even to those close to him. So Mehen had to personally guess who the young lady's mother was. But among all Leiborgen's acquaintances, there was no one who fit that description. Even before the man arrived, Azeni had been in contact with the Halban household, so she might have known someone. Only the sadness in her eyes when she remembered that time revealed the Empress's knowledge. But Mehen could not figure out what the Emperor's wife, who possessed the information, was hinting to him about. Under Leiborgen, the Duke had never had any contact with any of the women, so he had no clue. Madame did not show whether she was upset about the manager's lack of insight. Even the Empress did not know why the Duke was always in the north. But she suspected that it had something to do with his daughter, whom Halban loved. Mehen quickly lost the flow of the conversation with the woman, who deftly changed the subject. As soon as they started talking about Aralina, Mrs. Ears started itching from the fact that someone was discussing her. Since the prince was persistent in his affairs, he was able to make up for all the lag. And all this was for the sake of seeing again his dear friend, to whom he was not allowed to go. The heroine would only be glad if the boy continued to sit in the palace because of his lessons. So the lady pushed the child away quite rudely, but he didn't care at all about that either. All this time, Araline enjoyed the peace and quiet of the estate, but it ended. With a sigh, the lady admitted to herself that she even missed this noisy air a little. So the little girl gently stroked her friend's head so that he would forgive her for being harsh. With sadness, the prince suddenly admitted that he had thought a lot about his relationship with the girl. Aralyn became interested in this because the heir had not previously analyzed his actions. It turned out that Passion had not wasted his time in the palace, as he was not only studying. With the help of top trainers, the boy compiled a huge list of workouts for ladies. Its length turned out to be so enormous that it was surprising that the prince brought the list with him. Only a few minutes later, all this paper unfolded before the heroine, who was horrified. Aralyn instantly regretted that she had just treated the mad heir well. The boy sincerely could not understand why the little girl did not agree to his brilliant plan with training. But the duke's daughter didn't even want to think about obeying the child and starting to take care of her body. However, Passion never gave up so quickly, so he followed the lady on her heels, trying to attract her. In the end, the heroine was the first to lose her temper and turned sharply to the prince, who was pestering her with his plan. The little girl recalled that she couldn't even walk properly, so there was no talk of any training. No matter how much Miss rejected the very idea of training, the heir still persuaded her to at least look at the plan. The girl accepted the papers with the utmost skepticism, confident that she would refuse anyway. Imagine the little girl's surprise when the schedule turned out to be quite realistic even for her. But even so, Aralyn was not prepared to study almost every day under the supervision of an active prince. Passion didn't see a problem with something like that, since he himself trained daily with his teacher using swords. Once again, the duke's daughter pretended that she had never heard of any training. The emperor's son was visibly upset by this, as he had not slept at night to develop a plan of rules. The heroine realized that she could not refuse the child whose pitiful look squeezed her heart so much. In his joy, the boy immediately warned that afterward the lady would not have the opportunity to refuse his plan. The heroine was not sure that even with all this training, they would be able to cure her illness. But Passion was so full of enthusiasm that the little girl did not dare to refuse his actions. The heir wanted to take action immediately, dragging the little girl along with him right now. The lady sighed and thought that it really wouldn't hurt to feel better before she died. Aralyn never thought that she would regret her decision so much after just a short time. Passion's training proved so overwhelming for the little girl that she could barely stand on her feet. But the boy, who was stern in his teaching, didn't even think of stopping there, urging the lady on further. The prince was determined to go through with everything he had planned for the duke's daughter today. The heroine really tried her best to live up to the expectations of the active crown prince. She even did a lot of squats without complaining of dizziness or blurred vision. The lady then calmly completed a posture exercise that required a lot of effort from her. So now Aralyn had the feeling that she was about to die if she didn't rest at least a little. Meanwhile, Passion sincerely could not understand how Miss could have already managed to run out of steam. The boy only sighed heavily, watching how quickly the duke's daughter gave in from fatigue. He was a kind person by nature, so he extended his hand to the little girl to help her stand up. The lady had time to think with joy that her torment next to the princess would be over for today. But the child, with a joyful smile, declared that Miss needed to go through 2 more laps before they were finished. This finally convinced the heroine that a real demon was hiding under the heir's mask. And so, under the gaze of the energetic boy, the terrible life of the duke's daughter with training began. In addition to her studies, the child also monitored her eating, forcing her to eat huge portions every day. Miss could no longer withstand the strength training, but Passion constantly encouraged her. So all the heroine's thoughts were only about when this whole hell with body exercises would end. Previously, the joyful prince seemed to the little girl to be a terrible devil who came to kill her quickly. Aralyn could never have imagined that her quiet life on the estate would turn into such horror. She had even begun to miss that sunny maniac who constantly followed her around. And Passion was extremely pleased that he and his coach had managed to put together such a program. In this way, all the muscles in Aralyn's body were strengthened or grew if they were not there before. The only thing the boy couldn't understand was why the lady looked as if her energy had long since run out. At that very moment, a tonic that only his father used for his health was carried past the prince. A brilliant idea instantly came to the young gentleman's mind about how to help Aralina. The unsuspecting maid, as usual, brought the emperor his medicine at the appointed time. This tonic was made by the best masters to maintain energy in a man's body. The head of the empire himself had long been accustomed to using it, so he did not want to change anything in his life. But this time the tonic tasted so terrible that it became clear that someone had secretly replaced it with something else. At that moment, Arelyn drank some disgusting liquid that a boy brought her from the imperial palace. But the duke's daughter did not feel any changes in herself immediately after taking the unknown elixir. The prince revealed too late that it was a health tonic that his father had been drinking. The boy didn't see any problem in the fact that he gave this thing to Arelyn, taking it from his own father. The heroine was horrified that she had drunk the emperor's own tonic, even though she didn't even know it. Then some vague noise was heard in the corridor, and the children looked around with interest, surprised by it. How the imperial guards, led by Green, who shouldn't have been there, burst into the baby's room. Without explaining anything, the knights grabbed the heir and silently dragged him away from the Halban estate. The boy desperately resisted, but his strength was not enough to escape from his assistants. As a result, the doors slammed loudly, as if none of the guards had been in the room just a moment ago. For the first time in a long time, Aralyn was left alone in the room, which she did not immediately realize. The little girl noticed that the knights had taken the tonic bowl, which meant that it was all about him. Aralyn could only hope that she could now take a little break from training. A few minutes later, the emperor was already sternly scolding his son, who was dragged to him. The boy had nothing to say in his own defense, because he had truly done wrong for the sake of the duke's daughter. But the heir did not expect that his prank would cause such a violent reaction from his usually calm father. The man was indignant about his son's behavior because he tried to raise him to be a completely different person. In response to all the accusations, Peshin barely audibly whispered that he had taken the tonic for a serious matter. But the emperor could not believe that the boy had drunk such a bitter medicine for him on his own. The head of the empire was surprised that the child did not drink this elixir, since he stole it for other purposes. Peshin hoped that he wouldn't have to tell his father anything, but there was no other choice. Therefore, the boy admitted that he took the tonic only to give it to his sick friend. This news greatly shocked the emperor, who always told his son to take care of other people. The impressionable man was delighted that the prince had grown up to be a caring and sensitive heir. If the baby had done this out of curiosity or mischief, things would have taken a completely different turn. But in this situation, the father could not even scold his son because he supported his desire to help others. Peshin joyfully threw himself into his father's arms when he realized that he had been so easily forgiven. The emperor easily guessed that the boy had helped Lady Halban, who was in poor health. But Peshin was unwilling to admit that he had a romantic interest in the duke's daughter. The man was pleased to look at his son, who had grown up to fall in love with a girl. He only regretted that the prince had fallen in love with the wrong person. It was not without reason that Lady Halban was famous for her poor health, as she could have died at any moment. Therefore, none of the servants forbade the boy to communicate with this strange and sick girl. Everyone thought that their friendship wouldn't last long enough to develop into anything. It was impossible to make a princess of a child who was soon to die. The emperor saw himself in his son, since he too could only love one person. That is why the man supported the child, who sincerely wanted to cure Aralina. The ruler kindly suggested to the boy that in the future the lady should become his real bride. This caused a storm of emotions within the heir, who blushed in embarrassment at such a possibility. So, with a smile, the man promised to help his son with the healing tonic. Thus the prince easily escaped punishment and returned to visit the Halban estate. The heroine was disappointed by this because she had hoped that the boy would be punished for a month. But he not only returned, but also brought with him a medicine from the emperor for the girl. Leiborgen suspected in advance that the ruler would not dare to seriously punish his beloved son. Moreover, the manager had to deal with the fact that the twins also wanted to visit them. The little girl sincerely did not understand why her house had suddenly become a meeting place for children. Here the lady realized that she had only one way to avoid constant training. Even the energetic Peshen won't be able to spend much time with her among the other children. The lady was confident that Mehen would not refuse her desire to return to the gatherings of friends. The heroine came up with the idea of making even more acquaintances in order to have less contact with the heir. Peshen was close enough to hear Mrs. Plan, which surprised him, so already at the next meeting there was a commotion due to the prince's appearance there. Only Muvisk sighed sadly, as he was forced to be in this place. The boy understood perfectly well that everyone around would pay attention only to the heir. And he personally will once again conduct the event completely alone, since no one approached him. Previously, Harun was more cheerful because of the twins' antics, but for some reason they became quiet for a while. On the way to the hall, the future knight noticed someone's unfamiliar silhouette behind one of the columns. The girl had not yet chosen any friendship targets, so she kept her distance for now. Back at the Halban estate, she had come up with a brilliant plan for how to behave at the meeting. The little girl was going to find some new friend who would be only glad to see her. And by communicating with this man, the lady had to avoid the prince's training. It was a brilliant plan, and nothing should have stood in its way if not for one circumstance. Because Peshen spent so much time with Araline, everyone else began to hate her. And the heroine completely forgot about this nuance, so she quickly found herself on the sidelines of communication. Everything would have been fine if the Duke's daughter hadn't been hunted by cheerful twins. Miss did not at all want to arouse the children's hatred by communicating with these guys. Therefore, Arelin hid in panic behind a column where Muvisk found her in this state. When the girl crawled under the table in an attempt to hide, the boy for some reason followed her. Because of the future knight's silent behavior, the heroine did not know what was on his mind. Suddenly, Harun asked if the baby was in pain, which was a rather strange question. But the girl was more amazed by the fact that for the first time she heard the voice of Muvisk, who was always silent. This comment visibly embarrassed the boy, causing him to turn away from the little girl in embarrassment. Only after a few seconds did the lady realize that the baby had misunderstood the meaning of her hide-and-seek. As a sign of consolation, the heroine stroked the child's head to make him feel more comfortable. Miss remembered that Harun was the ideal friend in the story because of his loyalty. But the problem was that he devoted himself entirely to the crown prince. So many were disappointed with the knight who did not pay attention to anyone else. A cunning plan arose in Araline's head that she could bind the boy to herself. So the lady asked point blank if Muvisk would be willing to be friends with her at least sometimes. The child was noticeably surprised by this proposal, since usually no one talked to him. It was difficult for Harun to make a decision because he had promised to remain faithful to the prince in the future. The heroine deliberately shocked the boy with the question of whether he really didn't like her. The little girl tried to pressure the knight to make a decision in her favor, at least now. And only thanks to this did the Duke's daughter achieve success, which she mentally rejoiced at. But outwardly, Araline did not allow herself such a display of feelings so as not to frighten the boy. It was at this awkward moment that Peshen appeared near the children, whom he had been searching for a long time throughout the palace. The heroine, confused, announced that from that day on she would be friends not only with the prince, but also with Harun. This caused a wave of jealousy within the heir, who did not want to share his friends. In the end, it all came down to Arelin and Peshen sharing poor Muvisk all day. Alamund, poorly concealing his irritation, asked Halban to back down from such a stupid idea. But the little girl did not want to train with the prince anymore, so she stubbornly did not let go of Harun. The twins had noticed the escalating argument for a long time, so they watched with interest from the sidelines. They were amused to see the lady pulling the future knight towards herself, not intending to give him up. But the heir didn't like to lose, so he only clung to his friend even more tightly. Seal and Noel even made an imaginary scoreboard, assigning points to the children. Araline talked about how you didn't have to know someone to be friends with them, but the prince did not agree with this because he had communicated with the boy since childhood and did not want to change that. The twins watched the verbal altercation with interest, commenting on it like hosts, and poor Muvis couldn't find the right moment to run away from this conflict. Taking advantage of his status, Pession forced the boy to sit next to him. Seal and Noel immediately refuted the idea that the heir was breaking the rules for the sake of future victory. This further angered the heroine, who already felt that she was gradually losing. As soon as Harun opened his mouth for a moment, the boy and girl shouted at him too. This was the last straw for the patient child, and he quickly ran away. The heroine wanted to follow her new friend, but the heir abruptly grabbed her hand. No matter how angrily Araline screamed for the prince to let her go, the boy did not want to listen to anything. Passion was sad that the lady had once again chosen someone else and not him. The duke's daughter remembered how she once wanted to play with Harun to escape from the prince. But she couldn't even imagine that the heir would remember that one-time situation so strongly. The little girl was surprised by Passion's deep feelings, which he hid from her. But the boy was so embarrassed by his question that he let go of the duke's daughter's hand. He had time to regret what he had said to the lady, so he no longer wanted to know the answer. To prevent Araline from telling him anything, the prince deliberately covered his ears with his hands. And a moment later, he rushed after Movie under the pretext of looking for him. The heroine was left alone with the heavy thoughts that tormented her little heart. She couldn't even imagine that her confession of dislike for the heir would hurt him so much. Passion always seemed like a person who was neither afraid nor hurt by difficulties. The boy's gentle and cheerful smile made the lady completely forget that he was still a child. The heroine felt sincere remorse because she did not want to offend such a good friend. But Mrs. thoughts were interrupted by the twins, who finally decided to appear from the bushes. They arrogantly declared that they had seen through the Duke's little daughter's cunning plan. It just turned out that the boys were fixated on their game of collecting winning points. So they thought that the lady was going to win it only by bribing Muviska. Araline was once again convinced that it was better for her not to talk to these fools at all. At the same time, Harun could barely catch his breath, being frightened by the recent conflict. The boy couldn't understand why the new friendship had led to such serious complications. But what worried the knight most was the condition of the young gentleman who had recently found him. Passion was in such a bad mood, as if something terrible had happened not long ago. The heir was only interested in the question of how close Muvisk was to Arelin. Harun was worried that the prince wouldn't believe him if he said that they had only become friends today. The future knight felt uncomfortable having to choose one of his friends. However, he pleased Passion by saying that he would still prefer to be friends with him. This was the first time Harun had seen the Emperor's son become so dependent on another person. Now every detail connected with Arelin either made the boy happy or sad. For the first time, Muvisk found himself in a situation where he had to console the crown prince. Suddenly, the boy declared that he would never give up or lose to his best friend. Harun didn't understand at all why Passion suddenly started competing with him. But then the twins rushed into the main courtyard with important news for the Emperor's son. They shocked the child by the fact that Araline did not want to call him her best friend. The boys didn't have time to ask the girl if she wanted to see Harun as a friend. But it turned out to be vital for the prince to know the answer to this very important question. However, Harun volunteered instead of the guys, believing that it would be right for him to approach them. As a result, after a few minutes, the boy announced that the lady would not be friends with him either. The children were pleased that the Duke's daughter had not chosen any of them for true friendship. Muvisk didn't tell any of them that he had simply made up the answer out of his head. Due to his overly emotional state, the heir was not ready to communicate with other children, and the future knight took advantage of this to take a little walk in complete solitude. The heroine was now completely alone, standing in the shade of the Emperor's beautiful tree. From time to time, other children would gather around the girl and whisper unkindly about her. They had no idea that Araline heard all the vile words directed at her perfectly well. It was for this reason that the little girl tried to stay away from envious children. The girl only wanted to make more friends to get rid of training with the prince. That's why she was angry, because all her plans quickly shattered into pieces against the harsh reality. In both her past and current lives, the heroine found it difficult to communicate with other people. Meanwhile, the girls continued to slyly discuss the Duke's sick daughter. They dared each other to approach the little girl for fun and openly mock her. No one could ignore the fact that Araline had a sweet and beautiful appearance. This irritated only one girl, who bore the proud name of Leslie Belfart. This little girl boldly walked straight up to the lady who had been sitting alone under the tree until now. Leslie approached Araline directly with an offer to join her for tea. This girl was the only daughter of a rich marquis, and that is why she behaved arrogantly. After all, the little girl never needed anything in her life because of her parents' love. The only thing that weighed on the lady was that her family was only one rank below the Duke in status. But Leslie wasn't too sad about it, because she was supposed to become a princess in the future. Since childhood, there was no one among the girl's friends who was better suited for this role. And every day the mother repeated to her beloved daughter that she would marry the heir. All this instilled in Leslie incredible impudence and confidence in her own irresistibility. So Miss was looking forward to the time when they would begin to communicate much more closely with passion. Therefore, it was a huge disappointment for the lady that the heir simply ran past her. Leslie could not calmly endure such humiliation directed at her by a sick and weak girl. For some reason, the little girl, whom no one had previously paid attention to, attracted the prince. However, Belfart was confident that she could quickly force this lady to return to her estate. She wasn't going to watch silently as her future as an heir disappeared. That's why Miss was the first to invite Araline to her company to teach her a lesson. At first, the heroine did not understand at all why she should accept such a strange invitation from children. Leslie lied that she wanted to break the little girl's loneliness and help her make friends. To Belfart's surprise, Halban expressed interest in attending the tea party. In the eyes of the lady, exhausted by attention, this girl became something of a temporary savior. This is how the Duke's daughter found herself in the company of other girls, where she had never been before. The heroine felt awkward because she didn't know how to communicate with these children. Leslie immediately introduced herself as a future princess to put the lady in the know. But before that, Miss had no idea that this girl was aiming for a place next to the heir. Araline had grown tired of the prince's constant attention, so she didn't mind. She hoped that she could make friends in the new place who were her age. But Leslie did not let the girl enjoy her tea in peace, as she had questions. She was interested in whether Araline was really close to Passion, who often visited her. But the heroine herself had no idea that from the outside her communication seemed exactly like that. For the little girl, the boy was more of a warden from hell than a real friend. None of the girls expected to hear such a strange answer, so they were visibly embarrassed. What hurt Belfart the most was that Passion had been personally taking care of the lady lately. But Miss herself could not call such brutal training a manifestation of intimacy. Her story was suddenly interrupted by the quiet laughter of one of the girls, who could hardly contain herself. The little girl's name was Nadeli, and she quickly went from being friendly to attacking Araline. The red-haired lady gently hinted that the Duke's daughter lacked manners in high society. The heroine was surprised by this because it seemed to her that she had just started getting along with children. But none of those present initially intended to be friends with Halban's young daughter. Instead, they happily began to discuss all the bad rumors about the girl. Araline realized too late that she had been invited to tea only for the sake of a laugh. In her past life, the heroine had encountered similar people more than once, so she was not afraid. She had long since learned to fight back against people who politely humiliated her. That's why Araline didn't lose her composure this time, even though there were children in front of her. Miss again remembered that all the people approached her only with some purpose, and Nadeli was no exception, although she only asked people to listen to all her advice. However, the heroine simply refused such an opportunity, which would have made things worse for her. For the first time in her life, the red-haired lady experienced being rebuffed in response to her insolence. But the Duke's daughter was not someone you could point fingers at and laugh at without consequences. Leslie herself did not notice how she lost control of the situation because she wanted to humiliate the lady. She made an attempt to calm the Duke's suddenly enraged daughter, but instead the little girl confidently asked Belfart to continue to remain silent. Since childhood, many indirect glances have been directed at the heroine in this world. But since the baby always kept a low profile, people didn't have to touch her. At first, all the children treated the lady with courtesy, as they respected her because of their father's status. But over the years, they realized that nothing bad would happen if they ignored the girl. This is how the little girl quickly found herself completely alone, since no one wanted to play with her. But there was always a smile on Aralene's face, no matter how hard it was for her to be in the company of children. But this picture was strikingly different from the cold that was now coming from the Duke's daughter. For some reason, the previously sweet and calm lady acted as if she had become a completely different person. Nadeli thought that defeating the Duke's daughter would be easy, but she was sorely mistaken. So now it was Araline who towered over the children, enjoying her status. After the Duke's daughter's rude words, a heavy and oppressive atmosphere reigned in the room. But the heroine did not finish her lesson to these impudent and arrogant girls. She approached Nadeli, who had dared to laugh in her face a few minutes ago. But now this red-haired lady could barely raise her head from fear and humiliation directed at her. As soon as she heard that the miss did not need her advice, the girl burst into tears. Looking at her, the heroine could not understand why she was trying to get closer to these girls. Araline had no desire to remain in the company of aristocratic children. At that very moment, a maid looked into the room with an offer to bring some cakes. But the assistant didn't expect to stumble upon a bitterly crying lady instead. The girl immediately rushed to console the baby, for whose condition she was responsible. But Araline did not feel a drop of pity for the lady whom she had brought to tears with her words. Such rude behavior puzzled even the maid who was supposed to calm the girl down. The heroine was the first to say goodbye to the children, not wanting to stay in their company for even a moment longer. The little girl finally came to the conclusion that she was not destined to have normal friends. Meanwhile, at the Mayhen estate, preparations were underway for the visit of important guests to their small empire. The conversation was about the abode of wizards, which was always located somewhere high in the air. But before, the man had never heard of these magicians being interested in affairs on Earth. Dylan was happy to help the gentleman with all his affairs so that there would be less work. The assistant was only concerned that the situation with monsters in the north was getting worse. Until now, any mention of Duke Leborgan would make him darken with rage at his behavior. The most interesting thing was that it was the prince who volunteered to sponsor the support group. Mayhen was ready to swear that the heir was not helping Lady Arellen's father for no reason. Here Dylan confessed to the gentleman that today at the children's meeting something happened with Miss. It was the first time the man had heard of a girl being the first to start a fight and provoke someone. But the assistant believed that the little girl had done the right thing because she had not allowed anyone to harm her. The manager was worried that the girl might grow up to be like her wayward father. And at exactly that moment, the little girl began to quietly open the heavy door to the office. She appeared in front of Mayan with a joyful smile on her face, as she had already missed him. Only Dylan felt awkward because they had just discussed her possible punishment. But at the sight of the girl, Leborgan forgot that he had recently wanted to give her a severe reprimand. Instead, the man began to discuss the affairs of the lady who had something to tell him. So Dylan quickly realized that he had been worrying about the manager's behavior for nothing. Meanwhile, in the palace, Leslie was angry with her friend because she couldn't return home because of her crying. Nadeli even thought about asking Araline, whom she had laughed at, for forgiveness. But Belfart dismissed this option, as she was sure that the Duke's daughter would not be able to do anything. She angrily reminded her friend that no one was paying attention to that girl anyway. That is why the Marquis's daughter could not bear the fact that Araline looked down on her. She was going to personally take revenge on the impudent girl who brought her close friend to tears. And in carrying out this plan, a lady who usually behaved quietly came to her aid. Belfart had no choice but to accept the little girl's offer. The next morning, Uni didn't touch the girl because she thought she was going to have training. But the heroine remembered how sad the prince's face was during their last meeting. So the lady was sure that this time Peshin was definitely offended and would not come to the meeting. Therefore, Miss preferred to spend time in silence and calm reading a book. The maid did not argue with the decision of the young mistress, whom she respected for her behavior. But as soon as the little girl opened the door, the prince appeared before her, ready to teach her. The boy immediately announced loudly that it was time to train so as not to slack off today. Araline stared in complete shock at the child who haunted her every day. This time, the heir used a stopwatch to help the lady with more complex training. He was pleased that Mrs. Body was gradually becoming more resilient through exercise. The heroine kept casting secret glances at the boy, seeing that he was behaving somewhat differently. But the baby didn't say a word about their last conversation, so Araline also remained silent. At the same time, the heroine screamed inside herself because they still hadn't talked after the fight. She couldn't continue to pretend as if nothing had happened during their last meeting. But Passion acted as if there had been no awkwardness between them last time. Only after a few hours did the heir decide to ask his friend one small question. The girl didn't expect the conversation to be about her recent quarrel with the children of aristocrats at a tea party. Alamend clearly knew what exactly had happened, but for some reason he wanted to hear it from Arelin. However, the heroine was not ready to talk about her feelings, so she said that everything was fine. Passion noticed that the lady had become much more silent after the incident that had worried him. At the same time, the girl tightly clasped her hands on her knees because she was sincerely worried. She couldn't admit that this whole situation happened to her precisely because of the heir. The boy seemed to feel that he was the cause of the conflict, so he sincerely apologized. It was important for Araline to hear such words, even though she would not have asked for them herself. The heroine was always surprised by how grown up this boy was, even though he was living for the first time. But his warm smile always warmed the lady, no matter how older she was inside. Compared to him, Araline felt like a terrible person who hid her feelings. So for the first time, the lady responded with warmth to the care of the child whom she wanted to consider a friend. The boy remembered that the little girl wanted to make friends, and he did not want to interfere with her in this. But Miss had time to realize that she had already found her first and best friend. In her past life, the heroine never had time to allow herself to become attached to another person. Therefore, out of habit, even in this world, she distanced herself from everyone around her, fearing the pain of separation. But now Araline realized that it was much more pleasant to give in to these good feelings. As soon as the lady admitted that she considered Passion a friend, he immediately blushed. In his emotions, the boy began to beg the girl to let him hug her. The heroine couldn't push away the child for long, who was madly happy about their new closeness. Previously, the Duke's daughter had no idea how attached the heir had become to her. Miss was a little ashamed that the boy had his own role to play in the future of this world. But Passion didn't even consider the possibility that he might like someone else. The boy confidently stated that the little girl could completely trust him in such a matter. And the heroine did not argue any further, since she had no logical arguments. Although subconsciously the girl remembered exactly how her sad story ended. At the next meeting, the little girl experienced dramatic changes in the way her friends communicated. Passion loudly declared that the lady could do whatever she wanted to make friends. Miss guessed that the boy left her only because he was now her first friend. But she had no intention of trying to make friends with the other brazen children of aristocrats. However, before the little girl had even taken a couple of steps, she accidentally tripped and fell. But someone's warm and huge hand stopped her from an unwanted collision with a tree. It turned out that the same unknown magician had appeared next to Arelin just in time. The man carefully lifted the girl, who had just been nearly seriously injured. The man, whose name could not be